Chapter 54:17. Even so, Lin Yi did not take it to heart. After all, weapons were external objects. After staying on the heavenly island for a few years, his ideology was already very similar to that of the other natives. He always felt that personal strength was the true way to go. This was especially so in the ancient martial world, where everyone had a weapon. The weapons he saw were all common goods, and would not be of much use at crucial moments. However, the scene before him completely reversed his understanding. Although the shadow-shifting jar seemed to be a single-use item, its effects were really enviable. Once used well, it could be of great use both offensively and defensively. It could even turn the tide of a battle at a crucial moment. This was no joke. All of a sudden, Lin Yi became very interested in this unknown Chu family. Those unique shadow-based techniques had already given him quite a bit of inspiration, and now there was this miraculous shadow-shifting urn. It seemed like he'd have to pay them a visit once he got out of this place. Of course, even without this, Lin Yi would have paid them a visit anyway. After all, they were preparing to marry Duan Muyu. Although Duan Muyu didn't express her feelings clearly last time, Lin Yi was an experienced man. He could more or less guess a girl's feelings. It didn't matter how the two of them ended up in the future. At the very least, he wouldn't sit by and watch the marriage between House Chu and Yiling's sect. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a man at all. Shadow-shifting jar? After hearing Chu Wenshang's words, Chu Tianlu was immediately shocked. Then, he revealed a shocked and angry expression. This is the clan's treasure. According to the ancestral teachings, only the clan leader can carry it. Why is it with you? In the primordial underworld, every high-grade sect or clan would have their own specialties, and they would also have their own trump cards. Even a small clan like the Chu clan was no exception. The shadow-shifting jar was the Chu clan's ultimate treasure. This wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense of the word. It was a consumable item that could only be used once. Even so, it didn't affect its status as a clan treasure. Even though the Chu clan possessed the forging method, due to the harsh conditions, there were always very few of them. In order to avoid any accidents, they were usually tightly sealed in the lowest level of the vault, and only the clan head could use them. However, such an important clan treasure, something that even a golden core expert like Chu Wenshang had no chance of seeing, had actually appeared in the hands of Chu Tianliang, a young disciple at the peak of the late Foundation establishment realm. This was truly unexpected. Chu Hengding. Chu Wenshang's current state was still shocking. He had been tricked by Chu Tianliang, and his carotid artery had clearly been severed by the tip of a blade. Otherwise, he would not be bleeding so profusely. However, the strength of an early golden core cultivator was not just for show. This kind of heavy injury, which would have definitely killed an ordinary person, was actually forcefully stabilized by him. Although his appearance was terrifying, he would not die for a while. When Chu Tianlu heard this name, he immediately understood. Chu Hengding was none other than Chu Tianliang's father, a top-level figure who controlled the entire Chu clan's finances. Only 2 people in the entire Chu clan had the opportunity to enter the lowest basement. One was the current clan leader, a newly advanced nascent soul cultivator, and the other was him, Chu Hengding. Why did Chu Tianliang have the shadow-shifting jar? Even an idiot could tell that Chu Hengding was willing to pay a heavy price for this son of his. Uncle Wenshang, you saw it too. I was forced to save my life just now. This guy is already at the end of his tether. Why don't you quickly finish him off? Don't worry, the 1,000 spirit jades that my father promised you definitely won't be any less. Also, I don't want the spirit knowledge fruit anymore. It's all yours. Chu Tianliang calmed down slightly and hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. Just now, Chu Wenshang had almost been completely screwed over, especially with the precedent of biting the hand that fed him and stabbing Chu Xingping to death. If he didn't quickly salvage the situation, Chu Wenshang might turn around and attack him instead. That would be the end of him. Chu Tianlu's heart jumped when he heard this. The effects of shadow-shifting bones were about to disappear. At that time, his right arm, which he was used to using, would become a complete burden. He wouldn't be able to fight back at all. If Chu Wenshang continued to forcefully attack him, he would have nowhere to run. It had to be said that even though Chu Tianliang's performance in other areas wasn't worth mentioning, his words came at the right time. Sure enough, the expression of Chu Wenshang, who had already flown into a rage out of humiliation, changed. The spirit knowledge fruit and 1,000 spirit jades. There was no way he could resist such a temptation. As for the debt of being forced into a bloody mess by Chu Tianliang's shadow shifting technique, that could wait for another day. Uncle Wenshang, you've already personally experienced this guy's character. Do you still want to continue abusing him? Even if you really help him kill me, there's a high chance that he'll turn around and bite you in the end. I advise you to think carefully before speaking. Chu Tianlu could only open his mouth to persuade him. In his current state, there was absolutely no chance of victory. He could only attack Chu Wenshang's mind. Chu Wenshang was somewhat hesitant. Seeing this, Chu Tianliang, who was 100 feet away, hurriedly shouted, "Don't listen to his nonsense, listen to me. As long as you kill him, the divine knowledge fruit and the 1,000 spirit jades will all be yours. Uncle Wenshang, you should at least look at the other party's character before making a deal. Otherwise, if they turn hostile and refuse to acknowledge their debt, you'll be the one to suffer. Also, don't forget that you personally experienced his shadow-shifting jar." Chu Tianlu continued to persuade him. Chu Wenshang didn't feel anything before, but when he heard the last sentence, his heart suddenly thumped. It had to be known that Chu Tianliang's possession of the shadow-shifting jar was a serious crime equivalent to rebellion. Since he had personally witnessed it, Chu Hengding and Chu Tianliang would definitely think of a way to silence him afterwards. There was no other choice. At that time, even if he really obtained the spirit knowledge fruit and 1,000 spirit jades, it would only serve to hasten his death. When he saw Chu Wenshang's expression change, Chu Tianliang turned around and fled without another word. Chu Wenshang's guess was correct. Since he had been forced to use the shadow-shifting jar, all the witnesses present had to be silenced. Chu Tianlu had to die, and Chu Wenshang had to die as well. There was no way he could argue against this, so he could only flee. Chu Tianliang fled very quickly. Chu Wenshang and Chu Tianlu could only watch him in the dust. Normally, any one of them would be able to easily catch up to Chu Tianliang, but now that they were both heavily injured, how could they chase after him? Alright, now we've both become thorns in the eyes of this father and son. Chu Wenshang laughed bitterly. Offending Chu Hengding, a person with real authority at the top of the Chu clan, would not be easy in the future. Chapter 54:18. Chu Wenshang glanced at him and smiled bitterly. "You're really too honest. As long as we're not caught by the patriarch, people like Chu Hengding won't be able to take us down. I'm willing to bet that by the time we return to the Middle Island, we'll already be hated by everyone. They'll definitely pin the crime of stealing the shadow-shifting urn on us. Chu Hengding might even send a law enforcement squad to kill us openly. Do you believe me?" This. Chu Tianlu couldn't help but choke. He hadn't thought of this, but with Chu Hengding and Chu Tianliang's despicable nature, it was only natural for them to distort the truth. At that time, not only would they be unable to accuse them, even protecting themselves would be a huge problem. Fortunately, the shadow-shifting urn is locked in the lowest basement. Normally, apart from the patriarch, only Chu Hengding can obtain it. No matter how they distort the truth, it's still an unavoidable loophole. Moreover, he's been in charge of the family's finances for all these years, and he's been playing all sorts of tricks in private. The patriarch has more or less sensed it, but he's turned a blind eye to it for the sake of his father-son relationship. Tianlu, you're the patriarch's direct grandson, so you're not inferior to them by blood. We might be able to retaliate, Chu Wenshang analyzed. Yes, that's all we can do. Chu Tianlu nodded and suddenly took out the divine knowledge fruit. Looking at Chu Wenshang, he asked, "What should we do with this?" The two of them had turned from enemies into friends. No matter who died, the other would have a hard time in the future. Only by sticking together could they fight for a chance. It was a bit irrational to monopolize the divine knowledge fruit at a time like this. Although Chu Tianlu wasn't very smart, he could still see the big picture. Chu Wensheng looked at the divine knowledge fruit and licked his lips. He was very tempted, and even subconsciously had the urge to kill and steal the treasure. However, his rationality prevailed in the end, and he stared at each other. Chu Wensheng wanted this divine knowledge fruit even in his dreams, but it was also very important to Chu Tianlu. He was now at the great perfection of the foundation establishment realm. Once he ate the divine knowledge fruit, it was very likely that he would naturally break through the barrier and advance to the golden core realm. It was not suitable for anyone to monopolize it, but if they divided it equally, the value of this divine knowledge fruit would be greatly reduced, and no one would be able to achieve their wish. What should they do? The two of them simultaneously sunk into silence. A moment later, Chu Tianlu suddenly said, "Why don't we leave first and think of a suitable method? This place is extremely dangerous. We can't stay here for long." Extremely dangerous? Chu Wensheng was stunned when he heard this. There was no one around, and there were no signs of spirit beasts. It was reasonable to say that it was not safe to stay here for long. After all, the tide was going to rise soon. But to say that it was very dangerous, where did that come from? Okay, let's talk while we walk. Chu Tianlu carefully looked at his surroundings. He took the lead and walked at the front. At the same time, he said, "This place is haunted." Huh? Chu Wensheng followed behind him, his eyes filled with suspicion. This little brat wouldn't deliberately make up lies to deceive him in order to keep the spiritual knowledge fruit for himself, right? I'm not trying to scare you. Uncle Wensheng, think about it carefully. Why would I take the initiative to jump into the sea? Why would I know that the divine knowledge fruit is there? Don't you find it very strange? Chu Tianlu laughed bitterly. It's indeed very strange. Chu Wensheng nodded, and said suspiciously, "You mean that someone is playing tricks behind the scenes?" "It's not that someone is playing tricks, but that there really is a ghost. Earlier, a voice suddenly appeared in my head, and I couldn't help but jump into the sea. Just now, I found the divine knowledge fruit because of this voice. I don't know where it came from, and I don't know what it wants to do, but my intuition tells me that it's best to leave first." As Chu Tianlu spoke, he quickened his pace. "Is that so? So you humans all bite the hand that feeds you, don't you?" It was clearly still Chu Wensheng's voice behind him, but the tone of his voice terrified Chu Tianlu. He subconsciously stopped, and a layer of goosebumps appeared on his body. "Uncle Wensheng, you..." Chu Tianlu hurriedly turned his head. Chu Wensheng was still Chu Wensheng, but this tone were clearly the same as the voice that had appeared in his head before. Chu Wensheng similarly stopped. A strange smile hung on his face, causing one to tremble with fear. He said sinisterly, "Human brat, I'm the ghost you spoke of. Are you afraid?" "Ah." Chu Tianlu jumped in fright. He hurriedly took a few steps back, pointed at the other party, and stammered, You. Who exactly are you?" "Every wrong has its perpetrator, every debt has its debtor. I've never provoked you." "You haven't provoked me, but I'm rather hungry now, so I plan to eat you. What do you think of this reason?" Chu Wensheng was still laughing strangely. "Who the hell are you? What did you do to Uncle Wensheng?" If it was a normal person, they would probably have been scared out of their wits. Although Chu Tianlu was also very panicked, he still maintained a certain level of rationality and calmness. "Nothing much. I'm just temporarily borrowing his body. Of course, he's already a dead man, because his primordial spirit has already been eaten by me. The early gold core stage is a bit weak, and the taste isn't that great, but it's better than nothing." Chu Wensheng laughed strangely. After hearing this, Chu Tianlu immediately felt as if he had fallen into an ice house. The early gold core stage Chu Wensheng had died just like that? What do you want? Chu Tianlu retreated again. In his fright, he even threw the acute pain in his right shoulder to the back of his mind. Although he already had a bad feeling from the moment he jumped off the cliff and was always on tenterhooks, when he truly faced this strange and indescribable existence, he still felt a wave of fear. His back was already drenched in cold sweat. Your question is very strange. Since I spent so much effort to lure you down, of course it's to eat you. Could it be that I invited you here as a guest? Chu Wensheng, whose body was already occupied by the monster, spoke with a strange expression. Eat us. Chu Tianlu's heart jumped again. The so-called eat was obviously to swallow the primordial spirit. Although it wouldn't do any harm to the body, once the primordial spirit died, it would really die. Chu Tianlu was stunned. Seeing that the other party still didn't have any intention of directly attacking him, he inwardly thought that he definitely wouldn't be able to escape today. Thus, he gathered his courage and asked again, why me? This question was asked without rhyme or reason. If it weren't for the fact that this Chu Wensheng, whose body was occupied, had done this kind of thing many times before and was long accustomed to these people's reactions, he probably wouldn't have been able to react in time. Chapter 54:19. Chu Tianlu's face and ears flushed from his words. As long as one was human, they would always have some pretentious thoughts. This was human nature. Moreover, he had come to Tai Shi Island for a fortuitous encounter, and he had indeed found the spiritual knowledge fruit without a hitch. How could it be possible that he didn't have the slightest thought of getting lucky? Unfortunately, the appearance of this monster shattered his last bit of fantasy. There was no such thing as a free lunch falling from the sky, nor would it happen to hit him on the head. He was just a prey that was being targeted. Seeing Chu Tianlu's ashamed expression, Chu Wensheng continued to add insult to injury with great interest. To tell you the truth, there is only one reason why I chose you. It's because you're stupid. Otherwise, if you really had a cautious and suspicious temperament, even if my primordial spirit's hypnosis was of some use, I would still have to waste a lot of effort. Hee, are you satisfied now? Chu Tianlu almost choked out a mouthful of old blood. Having fallen to such a state, he no longer held any extravagant hopes of escaping alive. He only wished to die a quick death. He didn't expect to be ridiculed like this before he died. All right, I'm done with the nonsense. Quickly give me the spiritual knowledge fruit. Seeing that you, a human, are rather honest and easy to manipulate, I guarantee that I'll give you a quick death, said Chu Wensheng as he extended his hand towards Chu Tianlu. Chu Tianlu's expression was extremely bitter. He took out the spiritual knowledge fruit from his bosom, thinking that he was unlucky this time. Now that he was about to die, he didn't have the slightest hope of escaping, so he straightforwardly steeled his heart and stuffed the spiritual knowledge fruit into his mouth. Since he was going to die anyway, he had to taste the spiritual knowledge fruit before he died. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to die in peace. Bastard. Chu Tianlu's extremely daring action immediately drove Chu Wensheng crazy. Just now, he was putting on an act to lure people into taking the bait, but this time, he was clearly for real. Not to mention this mysterious monster, even Lin Yi, who was watching coldly from afar, couldn't help but be speechless. He hadn't thought much of Chu Tianlu before, but the more he looked at him now, the more interesting he seemed. In an instant, Chu Wensheng had already rushed in front of Chu Tianlu. One had to know that Chu Tianlu had retreated again and again just now. The distance between the two of them was at least 60 meters. Even if there was a qualitative difference in strength between the two of them, it was still impossible to cross such a long distance in such a short amount of time. Moreover, Chu Wensheng didn't even use the shadow step, but purely relied on the explosive power of his physical body. This was obviously not Chu Wensheng's strength. The primitive Jianghu mainly cultivated the divine sense. In terms of the physical body, it was obviously weaker than the experts of the same level in the Heaven Stage Island. In terms of the explosive power of the physical body, even the experts of the early stage of the Gold Core realm in the Heaven Stage Island could not reach this level, let alone Chu Wensheng, whose primordial spirit had been swallowed. Without a doubt, this was all thanks to the monster that had taken over his physical body. Using 10% of his physical body to use 15% of its strength was enough to show that the monster itself was not to be underestimated. Of course, this method of using it would definitely take a great toll on Chu Wenshang's physical body. He would probably collapse on the spot after using it a few times. Pa! The divine knowledge fruit reached the side of Chu Tianlu's mouth, but in the end, he was still unable to take a bite. It was forcibly snatched away by Chu Wenshang. Humph, you're about to die, yet you still can't let it go. I spent so much effort to lure you here to dig up the divine knowledge fruit. Did you really think that I was just using you to fish for a primordial spirit? You don't know what's good for you. It just so happens that I haven't tried the 1,000 ants technique for a long time. Then, I'll use you as a review and let you taste what it truly means to be in utter misery. Chu Wenshang's face revealed a sinister expression. Before he finished speaking, Chu Tianlu's neck was already gripped by Chu Wenshang's hand, and he was suspended in midair. Chu Tianlu's face instantly swelled like a pig's liver. No matter how he struggled with all his might, it was of no use. The disparity in strength between them was too great. Even in front of Chu Wenshang himself, it was difficult for Chu Tianlu to retaliate, let alone in front of this unfathomable freak. Moreover, his body was still heavily injured. Although Chu Wenshang's neck had also been sliced open, his opponent was only temporarily borrowing his body. He simply didn't take this trivial matter to heart. If this continued, Chu Tianlu would very quickly suffocate. However, if that was all, he could still be considered lucky. While Chu Tianlu felt suffocated, his primordial spirit seemed to have been plucked out of his body out of thin air. Countless ants were clinging to it and gnawing at it. First, it was extremely itchy, then it was extremely painful, and then it was extremely itchy again. This cycle repeated endlessly and continuously. In the blink of an eye, his entire body was about to be tormented to the point of collapse. You want to die so soon? Humph, how could it be that easy? Human brat, don't worry. When you're about to die, I'll go easy on you and save you. It's rare for me to use the 1,000 ants technique. If I don't torture you for a year or so, wouldn't it be too boring? I forgot to tell you, among the humans I tortured with the 1,000 ants technique in the past, the one with the most tenacity lasted for more than 7 months. He died and came back to life again and again, and only when his primordial spirit collapsed did I stop. I wonder how long you can last. At this moment, Chu Wenshang seemed to have been possessed by a demon. His face was still the same, but no matter whether it was his expression or his gaze, they clearly didn't belong to the category of a human. Chu Tianlu was so tortured that he couldn't speak at all. He could only roll his eyes desperately. Today, he had truly experienced the feeling of being in a state where he could neither live nor die. Chu Wenshang continued to torture him as he looked at the divine knowledge fruit in his other hand. He licked his lips and sneered, "Let me tell you something. This is the 35th divine knowledge fruit that I've obtained. Are you very surprised? Hee, you humans are all here for the divine knowledge fruit, but you don't know that this kind of treasure isn't something you can touch. My hope of rebirth is all on this fruit, and you want to compete with me? The 35th? Where are the other 34? A voice suddenly sounded above his head. At the same time, it carried with it an overwhelming, bone-chilling coldness. Chu Wenshang, who had a mocking expression on his face, was instantly shocked. At this moment, Chu Tianlu's mind was completely blank from the torture of the 1,000 ants technique. Of course, he wasn't the one who said this. Instead, it was another young man who had suddenly appeared in the sky. It was none other than Bing Wuqing, who had parted ways with Lin Yi earlier. Although this underground cave wasn't small, it wasn't very big either. Lin Yi stayed here and watched the show with great interest. This was enough time for Bing Wuqing to circle around the cave. In the end, she saw the divine knowledge fruit in Chu Wenshang's hand. Coincidentally, this guy said that this was his 35th divine knowledge fruit. With Bing Wuqing's personality, of course she would make her move immediately. As for the cause and effect, why would she care so much? Chapter 54:20. Chu Wensheng immediately felt immense pressure. A golden core expert was nothing. In his eyes, they were nothing more than food delivered to his doorstep. However, Bing Wuqing was a genuine expert at the peak of the early nascent soul stage, and her strength was enough to look down on others of the same level. No matter where she appeared in the immemorial Jianghu, she was an existence that absolutely could not be underestimated. For ice spears shot down from above. If it had been the Chu Wensheng from before, he would have died without a doubt, even if he had 100 lives. An early-stage gold core against a peak early-stage nascent soul, especially when it was a super genius like Bing Wuqing, such a huge disparity was enough to crush everything. In the end, the 4 ice spears all missed. After all, Chu Wensheng was not the real Chu Wensheng. How could an existence that could casually swallow the primordial spirit of a golden core cultivator be ordinary? Bing Wuqing's eyes were a little surprised. She had just arrived and did not know what had just happened, nor did she know the background of her opponent. She had simply judged that her opponent was not simple, but she did not expect him to be so extraordinary. Not only did he avoid the 4 life-threatening ice spears, but he even turned from defense to offense, taking the opportunity to stick close to her. Shadow sticking step. After all, Bing Wuqing was from the Middle Island sect. She immediately recognized the move that her opponent had used. It was the Chu family's shadow sticking step. When did the Chu family have such an expert? He could use the shadow sticking step so skillfully. Could he be a new nascent soul old monster of the Chu family? Bing Wuqing was only astonished. At this moment, Chu Tianlu, who was unexpectedly saved because of her intervention, was incredibly shocked at the scene before him. This guy had merely taken over Chu Wensheng's physical body. How could he use the shadow step? Could he use Chu Wensheng's martial arts technique after swallowing the primordial spirit? Most importantly, how could the shadow sticking step be used like this? As a Chu family disciple who had practiced the shadow sticking step, Chu Tianlu's understanding of it was unquestionable. Such a shadow body technique was certainly unique in terms of effect, but it was not a first-class move. After all, there were too many restrictions. Even if the conditions for the shadow were met, there was still a certain time to accumulate power. It was difficult to guarantee the effect in actual combat. However, Chu Wensheng's move just now had completely subverted his understanding. The shadow did not meet the requirements, and it did not show any signs of accumulating power. At the critical moment, it directly stuck to him like a ghost. Was this still the shadow sticking step? Comparisons were odious, and comparisons were odious. They were both the Chu clan's shadow-adhering steps, and they were both Chu Wensheng's physical bodies. However, when Chu Tianlu used it, it was so shocking. For a moment, Chu Tianlu was dumbfounded. He watched helplessly as Bing Wuqing and Chu Wensheng exchanged blows right in front of him, but he didn't take the initiative to retreat. He actually comprehended it. In the distance, Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh when he saw this scene. Chu Tianlu had narrowly escaped death, and had actually entered the state of enlightenment that countless cultivators yearned for even in their dreams at this time and place. Could this be considered a foolish person having a foolish fortune? Lin Yi was about to make a move, but now that Bing Wuqing had intervened, there was no need for him to show himself in a hurry. He might as well wait and see first. At this time, Bing Wuqing and Chu Wensheng were almost stuck together. This distance was too dangerous, and the slightest carelessness could lead to death. Even Bing Wuqing didn't dare to be careless. The moment her opponent got close to her, she did not hesitate to raise her ruthless ice stance to the extreme. With her current strength, the ruthless ice stance was no small matter, especially since this move was more powerful the closer the distance was. Chu Wensheng taking the initiative to stick close to her was practically sending himself to his death. Bing Wuqing was very certain that at such a close distance, she could instantly kill an expert at the peak of the early stage of the nascent soul realm. Even an expert at the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, who was a level higher, would be severely injured, and it was not impossible for someone with a weaker foundation to die on the spot. The result was just as she had expected. Chu Wenshang was frozen without any suspense, and his entire body instantly turned into a lifelike human-shaped ice sculpture. Bing Wuqing was instantly relieved. Being frozen to this extent, his physical functions must have completely collapsed, and he was already a dead man. However, at this moment, an earth-shattering roar of a tyrannical beast exploded in her ears, and a huge silhouette that was tangible but intangible emerged from Chu Wenshang's body. When she got a clear look at the other party's appearance, Bing Wuqing was stunned, and she almost blurted out, "A crocodile?" Not only Bing Wuqing, but even Lin Yi was a little surprised when he saw it. He had been trying to guess what kind of existence the other party was, and it was only now that the truth was revealed. It was actually a huge and ferocious man-eating crocodile. This was Tai Snake Island, and the consciousness fruit was transformed from the snake gallbladder of the Tai snake clan. Lin Yi had initially thought that this was a Tai snake, but he did not expect it to be a completely unrelated man-eating crocodile, and a primordial spirit at that. To be able to force me to this extent, you do have some skills, human. Humph, but this is as far as you can go. The voice of the man-eating crocodile was clearly imprinted in Bing Wuqing's mind, and what followed was endless itching and pain, as if millions of ants were crawling on her body. It was the 1,000 ants technique that she had just used on Chu Tianlu. Just now, Chu Tianlu had only held on for a moment before he was on the verge of collapsing. The torturous power of the 1,000 ants technique was evident, but the effect was not as obvious when it was used on Bing Wuqing. She did not even make a sound, but her expressionless face looked a little more ferocious. Not only that, but Bing Wuqing was actually thinking of counterattacking at this time. While her primordial spirit could be immune to most martial arts techniques, her merciless ice force could still be put to use, although it was not as immediate as it was with her alchemic fire. "You're pretty stubborn, aren't you? You still want to fight back? It's a pity that you're too weak. I'm the mighty sky-devouring crocodile. Back when I still had my physical body, I was invincible in the small immemorial martial world. You top-notch human cultivators were nothing more than a pile of food in my eyes. Although I'm in dire straits now, it's still more than enough to deal with a peak early nascent soul like you." The man-eating crocodile avoided the range of the merciless ice force while looking down at Bing Wuqing from above. Sky-devouring crocodile. The ferocious expression on Bing Wuqing's face was once again filled with shock. This immemorial man-eating crocodile was actually the sky-devouring crocodile that had wreaked havoc hundreds of years ago. It was one of the few super-ferocious beasts in the history of the small immemorial martial world. Back then, when it had stirred up trouble, it had forced the entire immemorial alliance into a state of panic. Countless cultivators had been swallowed into its belly, and the immemorial alliance had even specially organized a dozen nascent soul-old monsters to join forces to hunt it down. Chapter 54-21. According to historical records, this ferocious beast wasn't destroyed by humans in the end. Instead, for some unknown reason, it went into hiding on its own. No one expected it to appear in a secret cave on Tai Snake Island, and even become a primordial spirit. "Are you scared?" The sky-devouring giant crocodile floated calmly in the air, completely avoiding the merciless ice force's range. Meanwhile, the 1,000 ants technique continued to torment Bing Wuqing, making her invincible. Bing Wuqing's expression was ugly, not only because of the 1,000 ants technique, but also because she was really scared by her opponent. According to historical records, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was an existence that stood at the top of the small immemorial underworld. Ordinary nascent soul-old monsters were like a fart before it, and even nascent soul-perfected cultivators might not be able to escape unscathed from it, let alone herself, who was only at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. The only good news was that her opponent wasn't at his peak, and was only a primordial spirit. Bing Wuqing didn't have any other effective means to deal with a primordial spirit other than the merciless ice force. However, since her opponent had become a primordial spirit, her strength would naturally be greatly reduced. Otherwise, if it were the sky-devouring giant crocodile at its peak, Bing Wuqing would have long fled. To be honest, even though she knew that her opponent was only a primordial spirit, Bing Wuqing was already thinking of retreating. She had no other choice. Firstly, she couldn't beat him, and secondly, she couldn't do anything to him other than the merciless ice force. What else could she do but run? However, in her current state, she had to at least suppress the Thousand Ants technique before she could escape. Otherwise, she couldn't afford to be distracted. Moreover, although he looked fine on the surface, he was only holding on with his inhuman willpower. As time went on, even a deity would collapse. But how could she dispel the Thousand Ants technique? I'd like to ask, why would the sky-devouring giant crocodile, whose name was feared by everyone back then, appear in an obscure and remote place like Tai Snake Island? Bing Wuqing suddenly retracted her merciless ice force, and changed the subject. She wasn't the only one who wanted to know the answer to this question. All the cultivators of the small immemorial underworld probably wanted to know the answer as well. If the sky-devouring giant crocodile had continued to wreak havoc, the history of the entire small immemorial underworld might have been rewritten. Even the existence of the Immemorial Alliance today might have been a big question. You, human, are really an anomaly. The sky-devouring giant crocodile's illusory crocodile face revealed a very strange expression for the first time. The number of nascent soul realm old monsters who had died in its giant mouth could not even be counted with 2 hands and 2 hands. Bing Wuqing was indeed the first person it had ever seen who could remain unfazed after being struck by its Thousand Ants technique. She could even answer its questions calmly. Seeing that Bing Wuqing was trying to stall for time, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was happy to cooperate. He said, "Fine, no one can dispel my Thousand Ants technique anyway. You'll be tortured to death sooner or later. Since you want to stall for time, I'll do it with you." Hearing that, Lin Yi stopped what he was doing. When he saw that Bing Wuqing was in trouble, he was actually about to intervene. But since Bing Wuqing could endure it, he was interested to hear about the sky-devouring giant crocodile's past. This Tai Snake Island was formed by the Tai Snake ancestor from thousands of years ago. I accidentally discovered this place a few hundred years ago, but I didn't expect to meet its descendants. It just so happened that the Tai Snake clan had laid eggs not long ago, so I swallowed all of its eggs without hesitation. In the end, it fought me with its life. At that time, I thought that the Tai Snake clan was powerful, but it wasn't the Tai Snake ancestor. How dare it fight me, the sky-devouring giant crocodile? It's a pity that I didn't realize that it was a mutant, and it swallowed me whole. The sky-devouring giant crocodile sighed as it talked about this. What happened in the end? Bing Wuqing asked calmly. In the end, it stuffed itself to death. But I didn't fare much better, either. It melted my physical body, and I became what I am now. Not only that, but even the snake eggs I swallowed became my death talismans. Each one of them is stubbornly stuck in my primordial spirit, and I can only use the spirit knowledge fruit to melt them. The sky-devouring giant crocodile explained everything in detail. As it spoke, the sky-devouring giant crocodile kept sizing up Bing Wuqing. Its pair of terrifying eyes were glowing brightly. Although Bing Wuqing wasn't weak, she couldn't do anything in front of the sky-devouring giant crocodile. From the beginning to the end, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was in an invincible position. Otherwise, it wouldn't have bothered wasting its breath on her. That's right, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was using the sky-devouring giant crocodile to stall for time. It had absolute confidence in its Thousand Ants technique, so as long as it continued to stall for time, Bing Wuqing would sooner or later be tortured to death, and it wouldn't need to waste its energy on her again. But now, the sky-devouring giant crocodile had a new idea. It wanted to possess her. After devouring Chu Wenshang's primordial spirit, it seized the opportunity to possess Chu Wenshang's body. This was actually a form of possession, but it didn't take it too seriously, nor did it really control every inch of Chu Wenshang's body. It could barely be considered an incomplete form of possession. After all, it was just the body of a beginner golden elixir realm expert. In its eyes, it was no different from trash. But Bing Wuqing was different. It wasn't that easy to encounter a peak early nascent soul realm expert on Taishi Island. Moreover, it had already discovered from the first encounter that this person was extremely talented. If it could properly possess her body, even if it couldn't unleash its original strength at its peak, it could at least produce 30 to 40% of it. That would be enough to make it invincible in this tiny immemorial Jianghu. How could the sky-devouring giant crocodile not be tempted at all with such an unpolished piece of jade in front of it? Of course, even if they were both forms of possession of a beginner golden elixir realm expert and possession of a peak early nascent soul realm expert were two completely different things. If it wanted to completely possess and replace Bing Wuqing, even the sky-devouring giant crocodile would need to show enough patience. Is the Tai Shi egg a death warrant? There was no change in Bing Wuqing's expression, but a fine layer of sweat had formed on her forehead. The thousand ants technique was no small matter. No matter how hard she tried to suppress it, it was gradually showing signs of collapsing. Chapter 54-22. Although she was trying to buy time, Bing Wuqing was still surprised and could not help but ask, what does this have to do with the consciousness fruit? The tumors come from the Tai snake eggs, and the consciousness fruit also comes from the Tai snake eggs. I tried for hundreds of years before discovering that the consciousness fruit can remove these tumors. Unfortunately, the consciousness fruit is really rare, and if I'm unlucky, I won't be able to produce one in decades. I've been here for so many years, and this is only the 35th. The sky-devouring giant crocodile cried bitterly. If it had known this earlier, it would not have come to such a lousy place. Otherwise, it might have become the master of a small immemorial Jianghu by now. How would it end up like this? When it said this, both Bing Wuqing and Lin Yi in the distance could not help but feel a little disappointed. A total of 35 consciousness fruits. When they heard this number just now, they were overwhelmed with emotions. One consciousness fruit could upgrade one's primordial soul level. If they could get all 35, how many levels would they be able to upgrade? Even if eating too much of this thing would cause resistance, with the quantity, it would be no problem to upgrade 10 or 8 levels. Not to mention Bing Wuqing, even Lin Yi's heart trembled when he thought about this. The reason why his strength could improve by leaps and bounds in the past few years on Heaven Stage Island was not only because of various opportunities, but also because of various top-grade elixirs. But now that he was in the profound ascension stage, the elixirs were no longer effective. If he wanted to upgrade, he could only rely on hard work. If he continued to develop normally, it would take at least a few years, decades, or even hundreds of years. But now, a consciousness fruit suddenly appeared. What if it was also effective for profound ascension stage experts? Wouldn't it be worth it? Lin Yi's heart was burning, but now he was doused with a bucket of cold water. Since it was used to remove tumors, the previous 34 must have been used by the sky-devouring giant crocodile. In other words, there was only one consciousness fruit in front of him. I'm thinking too much. After understanding this, Lin Yi could not help but blush. He had been in a good state of mind before, but perhaps because he had projected his primordial soul for too long, he had been restless recently, and even worried about gains and losses. This was not a good sign. So there's only one. What a pity. Bing Wuqing also sighed. Everyone coveted the God knowledge fruit, and she was no exception. However, she was also very clear about her own position and situation. An absolutely rational person like her would not be blinded by greed and keep the God knowledge fruit to herself. The first thing she did after she got it was to present it to Lin Yi. If she could find a few more God knowledge fruits, Bing Wuqing believed that she would definitely be able to get a share of the loot, based on Lin Yi's usual open-minded character. However, there was only one God knowledge fruit, so there was nothing to be excited about. Heh, judging from your tone, you're still eyeing the spiritual knowledge fruit? The sky-devouring giant crocodile was amused when it heard that. These humans were really interesting. They were obviously about to die, but they still hadn't changed. But then again, the spirit knowledge fruit was really in Bing Wuqing's hands now. However, even a fool could tell that the sky-devouring giant crocodile was determined to have Bing Wuching. The spirit knowledge fruit would eventually belong to it, but it was in its primordial spirit state now, so it couldn't even pick it up. It could only return it to its rightful owner after it had possessed Bing Wuching. Can't I? Bing Wuching's struggling expression suddenly turned a little strange. Then, the temperature within a radius of several miles plummeted, and the merciless ice force poured out again. This time, it wasn't the sky-devouring giant crocodile that was hit, but Bing Wuching herself. In the blink of an eye, Bing Wuching was frozen into a human-shaped ice sculpture, just like Chu Wenshang. Is this fellow crazy? The sky-devouring giant crocodile couldn't react in time. Even though Bing Wuching's resistance to her own martial arts techniques was much stronger than the average person's, she was still harming herself by doing this. Not only would her body suffer frostbite, but even her primordial spirit would be severely injured. Primordial spirit. The sky-devouring giant crocodile wasn't stupid. When it thought of this, it immediately understood Bing Wuching's plan. She didn't hesitate to harm herself because she wanted to use this move to neutralize the Thousand Ants technique. The merciless ice force was effective against primordial spirits, so it might be effective against the Thousand Ants technique as well. This way, even though he would be injured on top of his own injuries, once the Thousand Ants technique was neutralized, he would no longer have the shackles around his neck. With his abilities, even if he couldn't defeat the sky-devouring giant crocodile, he still had a chance of escaping. The sky-devouring giant crocodile was still thinking of possession. How could it let him succeed so easily? When it finally reacted, it didn't waste a single word. Forcefully withstanding the power of the merciless ice force, its primordial spirit transformed into its original form. It looked down from above and bit down on Bing Wuching's head. According to its original plan, it wanted to use the Thousand Ants technique to torture Bing Wuching's primordial spirit until it collapsed. That way, it would be able to take over her body effortlessly. However, its plans couldn't keep up with the changes now, so it couldn't care less. It had to swallow this fellow's primordial spirit clean first. It would be a great tonic for it. A hint of anxiety flashed across Bing Wuching's eyes. Her decisiveness in cutting off her own arm had indeed paid off. While her primordial spirit had been severely injured, the Thousand Ants technique had been neutralized. However, her body was still frozen, and she would need at least a breath's time to recover her mobility. This was a gamble. Not only did she have to bet on the merciless ice force neutralizing the Thousand Ants technique, but she also had to bet that her opponent wouldn't make any big moves within a breath's time. Bing Wuching had won the first half of her gamble, but she hadn't won the second half. Since he couldn't move his body, he was now a live target. All he could do was watch helplessly as he walked into the tiger's mouth. Right at this moment, a beam of fire shot out from afar and hit the sky-devouring giant crocodile squarely in the middle of its bloody mouth. The sky-devouring giant crocodile didn't think much of it at first, but the moment the beam of fire entered its mouth, it howled miserably and retreated frantically in shock and fear. Who's that? The sky-devouring giant crocodile was instantly frightened. Although the merciless ice force was effective against primordial spirits, it could only be regarded as a side effect at best. It would already be impressive if it could exert 30% of its effect. However, this beam of fire was different. It was a natural enemy of primordial spirits, and its effect was more than 10 times stronger. I've been watching the show for so long. Don't tell me that the famous sky-devouring giant crocodile didn't notice anything at all? A figure slowly approached from afar. Bing Wuching was overjoyed when she heard the voice. Needless to say, the person who had come was none other than Lin Yi. Who are you? Watching as Lin Yi drew closer, the sky-devouring giant crocodile rose into the air once again in fear. It didn't dare to continue attacking Bing Wuching. Although the beam of fire from before couldn't be considered a serious injury, it was enough to cause it great pain. Chapter 54-23. Ever since it suffered a great loss at the hands of Tai Shi, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was no longer as lawless as it used to be. It had learned fear and scruples. It knew that it could only survive by maintaining these two things at all times. Why don't you guess? Lin Yi was a little mischievous. The sky-devouring giant crocodile was indeed an existence that stood at the top of the food chain in the ancient Jianghu, but it was far from it in Heaven Stage Island. As a profound ascension stage primordial spirit, it was a piece of cake for Lin Yi to hide from its perception. You are Tai Shi? The sky-devouring giant crocodile immediately thought of the existence that left a lifelong shadow in its mind. This was Tai Shi Island, and the most terrifying creature was naturally Tai Shi. Although the person in front of him was in human form, with the ability of a mature Tai Shi, it was not difficult for him to transform into a human form. Lin Yi ignored it and turned to look at Bing Wuqing. How are you? At this time, Bing Wuqing had already recovered from the frozen state. Although her physical body and primordial spirit had suffered considerable damage, she was not in a bad state. She forced a smile and said, "Boss, don't worry, I'm fine." As Bing Wuqing spoke, she handed the spirit knowledge fruit in her hand to Lin Yi. Lin Yi did not refuse and took it with a slight nod. For Bing Wuqing, the value of the spirit knowledge fruit was about the same as a gathering soul golden pill, but it was of great significance to him. After all, the profound ascension stage did not have such elixirs. As for Bing Wuqing, he would just have to compensate her with more gathering soul golden pills later. That's mine. The sky-devouring giant crocodile was furious when it saw this scene. Before, it did not care that Bing Wuqing was holding the spirit knowledge fruit, because it could eat her. But now that it was Lin Yi, it was extremely angry. Its beast instinct told it that once the spirit knowledge fruit fell into this man's hands, it would have nothing to do with it. Not satisfied? Then come and snatch it. Lin Yi's lips curled up as he provoked. After all, it was a famous super ferocious beast. After suffering a big loss just now, the sky-devouring giant crocodile's ferocious nature was already aroused. It was only out of fear that it did not make a move. Now that it was provoked by Lin Yi, it immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation and immediately prepared to bite down. Even though it was only in the form of a primordial spirit, its monstrous might was still sufficient to scare off any nascent soul realm old freak in the primeval underworld. Unfortunately, it encountered Lin Yi. Against primordial spirits, Lin Yi had a lot more tricks up his sleeve than Bing Wuqing. Lin Yi didn't panic. He casually shot out an alchemic fire. However, it wasn't aimed at the sky-devouring giant crocodile that swooped down from above. Instead, it was aimed at his feet. Sizzle. There was an ear-numbing sizzling sound as a puddle of black liquid appeared beneath Lin Yi's feet. Upon closer inspection, there seemed to be countless corpses of strange insects hidden within. However, they were quickly incinerated by the pill fire, leaving not a single residue behind. Is this your thousand ants technique? Lin Yi grinned. This sky-devouring giant crocodile looked like an unparalleled ferocious beast. Anyone who saw its appearance would feel that it was ferocious and invincible. However, no one would have expected it to be so cunning. If it weren't for the fact that Lin Yi had been on guard, anyone else would not have been able to dodge its dirty tricks. After missing its attack, the sky-devouring giant crocodile became even more frightened. It quickly stopped its feint and turned to flee. After all, it was an old freak that had lived for countless years. Even though it couldn't tell the exact level of Lin Yi's abilities, it could tell from their first encounter that he was not someone to be trifled with. Especially when he had mastered an alchemic fire, a killing technique that was extremely restraining. Losing a consciousness fruit was not a big deal. At most, he would just have to endure for a few more decades. However, if he continued to act tough, he might even lose his life here. This scene surprised Lin Yi a little. After missing its attack, it immediately fled. This sky-devouring giant crocodile was indeed cunning. The sky-devouring giant crocodile fled very quickly. However, before it could escape more than 100 feet, a huge black hand grabbed at it at lightning speed and forcefully sucked it back. Soul Hook. Alchemic Fire and Soul Hook. In this small ancient Jianghu, Lin Yi was the expert in dealing with primordial spirits. So powerful. Bing Wuqing's eyes lit up as she watched from the side. As for Chu Tianlu, who had accidentally entered a state of enlightenment, he finally woke up at this moment. He was dumbfounded when he saw this scene. At this moment, the one who was truly shocked was the sky-devouring giant crocodile. With its strength, it couldn't believe that it would fall at the hands of a mere human. The reason why it chose to flee was not because it felt that it was no match for him. It was purely because it had been bitten by a snake. Old freaks like it that had lived for countless years would always prioritize survival. As long as there was a way out, it would not easily take risks. But now, with Lin Yi's soul hook, it couldn't escape even if it wanted to. If it wasn't a primordial spirit, the sky-devouring giant crocodile would have been covered in cold sweat. Its primordial spirit, which was supposed to stand at the top of the small ancient Jianghu, actually had no power to fight back in front of the other party. The other party wanted to suck it in, but it could only obediently let itself be sucked in. Was this a fucking nightmare? Of course, this wasn't a nightmare. Just like how it had eaten Bing Wuqing before, falling into Lin Yi's hands could only be considered unlucky. However, it couldn't accept this. Once the soul hook was used, according to Lin Yi's habit, it would basically be directly trapped in the space of the jade pendant. After that, it would be squeezed and flattened as needed. No one would be able to do anything in the space that he ruled. However, something unexpected happened. The soul hook, which had never made a mistake before, actually failed this time. The sky-devouring giant crocodile's primordial spirit wasn't directly trapped in the space of the jade pendant. Instead, it forcibly broke free from the powerful restraints of the soul hook at the last moment and forcibly attached itself to Lin Yi's body. A false accusation. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but be shocked. They were both primordial spirits. Even if the sky-devouring giant crocodile stood at the peak of the nascent soul stage, there was still a qualitative gap between them. However, he didn't expect to underestimate this guy. After all, it was a super ferocious beast. Once the sky-devouring giant crocodile went all out, it was quite a threat even to a nascent soul cultivator. Besides being cunning, it was still very fierce. Not only did it forcibly break free from the soul hook, it also wanted to take the opportunity to possess Lin Yi. Bing Wuqing was already enough to make it drool. If it could take over Lin Yi's body, its strength would even be comparable to its peak. At that time, even if it couldn't recover the powerful physical body of the sky-devouring giant crocodile, it would be enough to dominate the small ancient Jianghu. Everything was perfect. Unfortunately, the sky-devouring giant crocodile miscalculated one thing. The moment it invaded Lin Yi's body, it suddenly exclaimed, "You're not a fucking human." No matter how much it thought about it, it would never have thought that Lin Yi's body was actually a primordial spirit. The other party was actually a primordial spirit just like itself. Chapter 54-24. If he had known this would happen, he would not have considered possession. He would have just devoured the spirit directly. Now, he had chosen the wrong direction and used the wrong strength. The sky-devouring giant crocodile felt like it had used all its strength to punch empty air. It was so frustrating. If it was just uncomfortable, it would have been fine. The key was that it had lost the upper hand. Don't forget, primordial spirit devouring ability was not unique to it. It was really a mistake. Ever since he learned the essence of primordial spirit devouring ability from Jiao Ying, although Lin Yi had only used the soul hooking hand, it did not mean that he would not use primordial spirit devouring ability even if he was beaten to death. Previously, it was only because of psychological factors and the fear of the side effects that he did not dare to use it easily. Now that he was forced to this step, if he did not make a move, he would be taken over. There was nothing to worry about. The sky-devouring giant crocodile was about to use its devouring talent to make up for it. However, in the end, Lin Yi had already made the first move. This was like a life-and-death battle. It had just set one foot in the arena, and before it could even prepare, the other party had already chopped down with an axe. What could it do? You overestimate yourself. The sky-devouring giant crocodile snorted angrily. Although it was very surprised that the other party could also devour spirit, and that it had fallen into such a passive situation, it did not lose confidence. Devouring was the sky-devouring giant crocodile's special talent. Moreover, its spirit level was also top-notch in the pugilistic world. Who could devour who? The two spirits wanted to devour each other. This was a battle that belonged to the spirits. But soon, the sky-devouring giant crocodile was once again shrouded in shock. It was shocked to find that the other party's devouring ability was not inferior to its own. What was more exaggerated was that the other party was actually a mysterious ascending stage spirit. Just this alone directly sentenced the sky-devouring giant crocodile to death. Not only did it lose the upper hand, the key point was that the other party's strength was far above it. It was like a battle between two armies. In front of Lin Yi, it was almost defeated without the slightest resistance. The spirit of the dignified sky-devouring giant crocodile was directly devoured by Lin Yi. Phew! Lin Yi heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Although this result was within his expectations, it was his first time devouring a primordial spirit after all. He was glad that it went so smoothly. The devouring continued. Although the sky-devouring giant crocodile had no power to resist, its level was destined that no matter how smooth it was, the process would not be too short. After all, it was a primordial spirit that stood at the peak of the Yuanying stage. It could almost be regarded as a half-step profound ascension. The volume of this divine sense was not small for Lin Yi. At the same time that he was devouring the soul, Lin Yi's aura suddenly became slightly unstable. After that, the fluctuation gradually grew larger, and it seemed to show signs of being on the verge of erupting. Is he going to break through? Bing Wuqing, who was beside him, was shocked when she sensed this scene. Lin Yi had always been unfathomable in her heart, but she had never known Lin Yi's specific realm. When she felt the strong primordial spirit fluctuation, she couldn't help but be stunned. It was actually the legendary mysterious ascension stage. Not only that, Lin Yi was also breaking through. Stay away from him. Bing Wuqing immediately reacted and drove Chu Tianlu to the side. She ignored her injuries and stayed by Lin Yi's side to protect him. The breakthrough process could not be disturbed by any external forces, otherwise the consequences would be unimaginable. Devouring the sky-devouring giant crocodile's primordial spirit was a response that Lin Yi had not planned. He had originally wanted to just use the soul-reaping hand, but the situation forced him to use this move. What surprised him the most was that he had unknowingly reached this step. Because of this opportunity, he had forcibly broken through. At a level like the mysterious ascension stage, it was extremely difficult to advance one level. This was an unexpected surprise for Lin Yi. Previously, he was already at the peak of the early stage of the mysterious ascension. If he successfully broke through this time, he would be at the middle stage of the mysterious ascension. However, surprise was surprise. At this moment, Lin Yi was not as overjoyed as he had expected. Relying on devouring primordial spirits to achieve a forced breakthrough was not the most ideal method for him. There were many hidden dangers involved. This hidden danger did not simply come from the opportunity itself, but mainly from the sky-devouring giant crocodile. This was because this crocodile was not a pure primordial spirit at all, but a sugar-coated bullet with poison. Unless one was as gifted as Jiu Ying, devouring primordial spirits would definitely have repercussions. This was a logical thing, and it was precisely because of this that Lin Yi was so against devouring primordial spirits. He had always only used the soul-reaping hand. If he was really focused on breaking through, he could have done so a long time ago. However, the path of cultivation was like walking on thin ice. Being greedy and advancing prematurely often did not lead to a good end. This time, Lin Yi was purely forced into a corner. This was Lin Yi's mentality. Now, although there was a pleasant surprise of breaking through, it was closely followed by trouble. Lin Yi suddenly realized that his primordial spirit, which had been strengthened, was no longer as pure as before. When devouring the primordial spirit of the other party, it was inevitable to absorb some of the other party's emotions and memories, especially the obsession before being devoured. This was a subtle influence, and no matter how strong a person was, they could not completely eliminate it. They could only rely on their own strong willpower to suppress it to the edge of their consciousness. After a long time, these things would gradually fade away with the wind. With Lin Yi's willpower, if the other party was just an ordinary person, to be honest, there would not be any special effect. His willpower was enough to control it freely. The problem was that the other party was a sky-devouring giant crocodile that had left a deep mark in the history of the ancient pugilistic world. It was an old monster that had lived for many years. This huge amount of information was simply overwhelming. Although it was Lin Yi who devoured its primordial spirit, it felt like a snake swallowing an elephant. Lin Yi was about to be stuffed to death by it. The pain in his brain was so intense that it felt like it was about to explode. In just a few seconds, Lin Yi felt that it was as long as a few years or decades. If it was an ordinary person, their consciousness would have long collapsed. Although he did not have the unique racial talent like Jiu Ying, Lin Yi relied on his heaven-defying willpower to hold on and finally escape the disaster. However, Lin Yi did not have the chance to rejoice, nor did he have the time to feel the strength of the mysterious Ascension intermediate stage. He encountered a very troublesome problem. The primordial spirit tumor that was originally bothering the sky-devouring giant crocodile was not digested along with the primordial spirit of the sky-devouring giant crocodile. Instead, it was transferred to his head, stubbornly like a bone maggot. Chapter 54-25. Thinking about the causes and consequences of this, Lin Yi could not help but feel a headache. How could he deal with this thing? The good thing was that after this transfer, although these tumors weren't completely removed, they were weakened quite a bit. To Lin Yi, it was a headache, but it wasn't as bad as the sky-devouring crocodiles. It was still bearable. However, if he ignored it, who knew what would develop in the future? It would be fine if it gradually faded like other obsessions over time, but what if it became more and more intense like a malignant tumor? Judging from the experience of the sky-devouring giant crocodile, it was obviously not the former. Otherwise, it would not have these tumors after living for so many years. The more he thought about it, the more frightening the consequences were. Lin Yi would rather not upgrade than get involved in such trouble. Unfortunately, there was no if in this world. The sky-devouring giant crocodile did not have a chance to start over, and neither did he. Not more, not less, there are still 9 tumors. Lin Yi carefully checked himself 3 times, and this was the final conclusion. He did not know if a spirit knowledge fruit could resolve all these tumors. If a spirit knowledge fruit could only resolve 1 tumor, then it would be really troublesome. The good thing was that after the second transfer, other than making him feel uncomfortable and irritated, there weren't any other obvious side effects, and he could suppress it for a while. Lin Yi didn't know what to do with it, but there were no obvious side effects. He could suppress it for a while. Lin Yi could not help but sigh. His previous decision was very wise. Although the effect of the spirit devouring was immediate, it was really a very risky thing. Fortunately, he had been using the soul reaping hand before. Otherwise, if he had devoured the spirit frequently, even without these troublesome spirit tumors, he would have long been affected by those remnant thoughts. An hour later, Lin Yi slowly opened his eyes. After his unremitting efforts, the 9 spirit tumors of different sizes had been suppressed by him to the edge. He was temporarily safe, but he had buried a bunch of irregular bombs. If he could not find a way to solve it as soon as possible, if they were detonated at the wrong time, he would really die without a burial place. Congratulations, boss. She only knew that Lin Yi's strength had increased by a level, and the thighs she was hugging had become even stronger. She was completely unaware of Lin Yi's current predicament. It's nothing. Lin Yi shook his head noncommittally. No one would be happy to be involved in such a situation. Of course, He had no intention of pouring out his grievances to Bing Wuching. After all, Bing Wuching wouldn't be able to help him even if he did, so he could only think of a solution himself. Bing Wuching was even more impressed by Lin Yi's performance. Even though he was usually expressionless, he could not help but be overjoyed when he broke through to the next level. The higher the level, the rarer it was. He could not remain so indifferent. Standing up from the ground, Lin Yi sized up Bing Wuching and asked, "Are your injuries serious?" "They're fine. I used to get frostbitten by myself when I was cultivating in the past, so I'm used to it." Bing Wuching was an absolutely rational and pragmatic person, but she was an out-and-out lunatic when it came to cultivation. She challenged her limits almost every single time she cultivated. She had lost control of her heartless ice force at least 800 times, if not 1,000 times. She had suffered far more serious injuries than this one, so she had long gotten used to it. Moreover, her physique was special, and she constantly challenged her limits. Disregarding everything else, at least her resistance to the cold was second to none. Even Lin Yi could not be compared to her. Lin Yi nodded. If it were in the past, he would definitely give Bing Wuching a checkup himself. But now, he was too preoccupied to bother with such things. Moreover, he could tell that Bing Wuching's injuries were indeed not serious. Looking at the time, it was already evening. Once the tide rose, the entire cave would be flooded, so it was not a good idea to linger. Lin Yi was about to leave with Bing Wuching at once. As for the spirit knowledge fruit, he would slowly study it after they got out. At this moment, Chu Tianlu, who had been chased away by Bing Wuching, gathered his courage and came up to them. He bowed and expressed his gratitude. "My two benefactors, thank you for saving my life. I can't thank you enough. I can never repay your kindness. If there's anything I can do for you, I'll do my best to help you." The two of them looked at each other. Bing Wuching did not know the cause and effect of what had happened, so she did not take this person to heart. Lin Yi, on the other hand, said with a hint of playfulness, "Repay your kindness? What can you do for us in your current state?" Chu Tianlu blushed involuntarily. His shoulder was pierced through, and one of his arms was crippled. He did not even have the strength to protect himself, let alone repay their kindness. On Tai Snake Island, a mere foundation building consummate was already a weakling, let alone being injured to such an extent. Although what he said just now was sincere gratitude, if he really wanted to compete, he was just saying it to sound nice. While Chu Tianlu was distracted, Lin Yi and Bing Wuching had already strode towards the entrance of the cave. Since there was only one spirit knowledge fruit in this place, there was no point in staying any longer. They might as well get out as soon as possible. Chu Tianlu laughed bitterly and hurriedly followed behind. No matter what he planned to do, he had to get out of this cave first. Not long after, the three of them walked out of the cave and climbed back to the top of the cliff. This was not a difficult task for any foundation building expert. It was just a little more effort. "Where are we going next?" Bing Wuching asked. She had come here purely to accompany Lin Yi. Of course, she had also thought about the consciousness fruit after coming here, but since there was only one, it had nothing to do with her anymore. Not only the underground cave, but if there were no accidents, it was probably the only one in the entire Tai Snake Island. Otherwise, the sky-devouring giant crocodile wouldn't have waited there. As for the other heavenly treasures, they were not important to her at her current level. They were not essential, and it all depended on Lin Yi's decision. Lin Yi pondered for a moment. In his current state, it was best for him to quickly find a place to go into seclusion and carefully study the effects of the spirit knowledge fruit on the 9 primordial spirit tumors, or if there were any other ways to resolve the 9 primordial spirit tumors. However, he had already suppressed all of them, so there was no hurry. "Let's continue to walk forward and look for Ling Tianyu. I'm a little worried seeing how he was before," said Lin Yi. Although Ling Tianyu was not his little brother, they were friends. Moreover, if it were not for him this time, Lin Yi would not have had the opportunity to obtain the spirit knowledge fruit. If something really happened to Ling Tianyu here, he would feel very guilty. Chapter 54-26. Lin Yi lifted his head to take a look, then walked in the direction of the snake's head. Bing Wuqing followed closely behind, but the two of them stopped after a few steps. She turned to look at Chu Tianlu, who was following behind, and asked, "Why are you following us?" They had never met each other before. Although Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing had saved him before, it was just a side effect. They had never really wanted the other party to repay their kindness, nor would they take his word seriously. To be precise, they would never think about it at all. It was not strange for Chu Tianlu to follow them before. After all, he had to come out of the cave eventually. But it was a little unreasonable for him to still follow them at this time. Do you want to try your luck again? Look for the divine knowledge fruit in other places? Lin Yi asked. No, the divine knowledge fruit contains the essence of the Tai snake clan. It will only grow one for a period of time, and there won't be a second one. Chu Tianlu shook his head. He had done a lot of research on this matter, so he was quite clear about it. Then what do you mean? Bing Wuqing's face instantly darkened. With her rational and pragmatic style, she would not allow such a guy to follow her. She had no intention of attacking an irrelevant person like Chu Tianlu, but if he got in her way, she would absolutely not hesitate. That. Facing the doubtful gazes of the two, Chu Tianlu found it a little difficult to speak. In the end, he braced himself and confessed, "I don't want to be separated from you two brothers. Otherwise, if I go out alone and meet Chu Tianliang on the way, I will definitely die. He won't let me go, and maybe he will find other helpers." These words sounded a little insatiable, but Chu Tianlu had no choice. If he was in his normal state, there would naturally be no problem for him to deal with Chu Tianliang, but now that he was seriously injured and had lost an arm, once he encountered Chu Tianliang at the peak of the late Foundation establishment stage, he would definitely be in danger. Although Chu Tianliang had escaped before, Chu Tianlu was almost certain that he would definitely not leave Tai Snake Island so easily. Now that they had shed all pretense of cordiality, this was his only chance to get rid of him. Otherwise, by the time he returned to the Middle Island, everything would be too late. Thus, Chu Tianliang would definitely think of a way to lie in ambush and look for a final opportunity. If he rashly left, it would be extremely easy for him to fall into the other party's trap. Moreover, if he didn't directly leave, it would still be extremely dangerous for him to wander around Tai Snake Island in his current state. Thus, without any other choice, Chu Tianlu could only thicken his face and come up with this plan. Only by following closely behind Lin Yi and Ling Yun would he be able to find a path of survival. "You're quite honest," Bing Wuqing said. She didn't show any signs of annoyance or admiration. In her eyes, Chu Tianlu was just an insignificant passerby. That was all. When Lin Yi heard this, a strange expression appeared on his face. He suddenly grinned playfully and said, "How do you know that I won't kill you?" Huh? Chu Tianlu was instantly dumbfounded. He was so stunned that he couldn't speak. Although the two of them didn't have any friendship with him, their previous experiences had indeed saved his life. Normal people wouldn't think of them as enemies. Otherwise, why would he be so thick-skinned as to take a yard after being given an inch? Chu Tianlu wasn't the only one who heard this. Even Bing Wuqing was a little dumbfounded. She thought about the other party's identity, then looked at Lin Yi's half-smiling expression, and then came to a sudden realization. Why? Why do you want to kill me? Chu Tianlu was still in a daze. You tell him. Lin Yi gestured at Bing Wuqing with his lips. You're a descendant of the Chu clan, right? It looks like you're an outstanding talent of the younger generation. It's very likely that you'll be the one to form a marriage alliance with the Yiling sect. Bing Wuqing's speculations were all on point. She then said, Do you know who Duan Muyu from the Yiling sect is? WH. Who is she? Chu Tianlu asked. She's my boss's woman. Lin Yi and Duan Muyu only had vague feelings for each other. Neither of them had made it clear, but Bing Wuching's words directly confirmed their status. Cough, cough, cough. What? Chu Tianlu was so shocked that his jaw dropped. He was in a daze for a long time before he came to his senses. He asked doubtfully, is this true? Do you think I have the spare time to lie to you? Bing Wuching curled her lips. He was a dignified expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. According to the rules of the immemorial martial world, it was difficult for someone like Chu Tianlu to even meet him, let alone talk nonsense like this. Chu Tianlu could only smile bitterly and speechlessly. For him, this trip to Tai Shi Island was inseparable from Duanmuyu. He didn't even greet her before, but he almost died because of her. He was saved by Lin Yi and Chu Tianliang. He thought that he was lucky to have met a good person, but he didn't expect that it was actually related to her. This was really a coincidence. After being embarrassed for a long time, Chu Tianlu didn't know what to say. Although he had already said to Chu Tianliang that he had never thought about the marriage alliance, his only thought now was to cultivate without being disturbed. The problem was that even if Chu Tianliang didn't believe him, would Lin Yi believe him? Duanmuyu was Lin Yi's woman, and he, Chu Tianlu, was an outstanding talent of the Chu family's younger generation. No matter what he thought, objectively speaking, he was indeed the most likely candidate for marriage alliance. To some extent, they were likely to be rivals in love in the future. It seemed logical for Lin Yi to kill him here to eliminate future troubles. He was both embarrassed and afraid. Chu Tianlu could only smile bitterly. Since his life was saved by the other party, there was nothing wrong with returning it to the other party. He could only say that his fate was as such. And with this potential relationship, even if Lin Yi didn't kill him, he couldn't shamelessly follow Lin Yi and Chu Tianliang anymore. He knew that Chu Tianliang was eyeing him covetously. In his current state, the chances of him leaving Tai Shi Island alone were really slim. Seeing Chu Tianlu's expression change, Lin Yi couldn't help but find it funny. After a while, he said, "I'm just joking with you. If I wanted to kill you, I would have done so long ago. Why would I keep you alive until now? Many thanks." It wasn't convenient for him to cup his hands, so Chu Tianlu hurriedly bowed again. In fact, he had already thought of this. He just didn't know what he should do because he was confused about the road ahead. Although he was confused, Chu Tianlu felt that if he stood in the other party's position, they would definitely not be willing to let him follow. He immediately prepared to leave with a downcast expression. At this time, he suddenly heard Lin Yi say, "If you want to follow us, that's fine. However, we're going to meet up with a friend. It's very likely that the road ahead will be extremely dangerous. Aren't you afraid?" Chapter 54:27. Chu Tianlu's eyes brightened, and he hurriedly said, "I'm not afraid. It's better than dying. Okay, in that case, you can follow me." Lin Yi didn't mind. To be honest, this was also because he was satisfied with Chu Tianlu's attitude. Otherwise, if this guy coveted Duanmuyu like Chu Tianliang, even if he didn't kill him directly, he definitely wouldn't take care of him like this. The three of them immediately set off together. Tai Snake Island was long and narrow, and there were basically no forks in the road. The direction of their advance was very clear, which was the snake head in the distance. On the way, Chu Tianlu acted very reserved, mainly because he felt awkward. Lin Yi, on the other hand, was fine. After all, the marriage alliance between House Chu and Yiling didn't have much to do with Chu Tianlu. Even if he really did become a candidate for the marriage, he was just a puppet who had no choice. Not only was it unfair, but it was also meaningless to vent his anger on him. Moreover, for Lin Yi, the key to this matter was Duanmuyu's attitude. As long as this was confirmed, the Yiling sect and the Chu family weren't a big problem. As a profound ascension middle stage existence, Lin Yi obviously had this kind of vision. Without mentioning Duanmuyu, Lin Yi asked a lot about the Chu family's shadow martial arts. Although the level of the battle he saw before was a little low, it still gave him a lot of inspiration and enlightenment. If he could absorb the essence of it, whether it was directly copying the Chu family's shadow martial arts or improving and integrating it into his own moves, it would be of great use. Chu Tianlu didn't hold back anything he knew. Logically speaking, there were many essences that shouldn't be revealed to outsiders, but right now he had the mentality of repaying a debt of gratitude. Not to mention that Lin Yi was just casually asking a few questions. Even if Lin Yi wanted the Chu family's secret manual for the shadow element, he'd probably think of a way to get it. Bing Wuqing had been listening on the side all the way. She had a much deeper understanding of the Chu family's shadow system martial arts than before, but that was all. However, what made her and Chu Tianlu dumbfounded was that Lin Yi had actually started to use the shadow step as they walked. Although he wasn't very proficient at it, and the effects weren't that great, he was already at the beginner level. Chu Tianlu was stupefied. How long had it been? It hadn't even been 2 incense sticks worth of time, yet he could already use the shadow step. It had to be known that even the most talented disciple of the Chu clan would need at least 2 years of hard work to master a high-level movement technique like the shadow step. However, Lin Yi had only spent 2 years, and he hadn't even gone through any systematic training. All he had done was listen to Chu Feng's idle chatter. When comparing goods, you have to throw them away. When comparing people, you have to die. The ancients did not deceive me. Similarly, Bing Wuqing's shock was no less than Chu Tianlu's. When it came to geniuses, he could be considered the top genius in the ancient Jianghu, and only people like Ling Tianyu could be mentioned in the same breath as him. But even he couldn't master other people's martial arts techniques as easily as Lin Yi. This was not just a matter of comprehension. More importantly, she was restricted by her mental cultivation method. If Bing Wuqing were to cultivate the Chu family's shadow-type martial arts techniques, she would definitely go berserk. Just like that, they walked for 4 hours. Suddenly, 2 young cultivators in front of them shouted for help. They scrambled and ran towards the 3 of them, as if something extremely terrifying was chasing after them. Chu Tianlu was still talking to Lin Yi about the shadow-shifting urn. When he saw the 2 people in front of him, his expression changed drastically. He wanted to rush forward without saying anything, but Lin Yi pulled him back. "What are you doing?" "Those are my friends. I want to save them." Chu Tianlu seemed to have completely forgotten that he was injured at the moment. He couldn't even use half of his normal strength. Even if he rushed forward, he wouldn't be able to save them. Instead, he would get himself killed. Even if you want to be loyal, you have to look at the situation. This is not the way to die. Lin Yi snorted. He grabbed Chu Tianlu with one hand and Bing Wuqing with the other, then turned around and ran. For this, he didn't even hesitate to use the extreme butterfly subtle steps. This was the extreme of his movement technique. Before Chu Tianlu could react to what was happening, he had already been brought several miles away by Lin Yi. His face was deathly pale. He stuck out his tongue and stammered, so fast, not to mention him, even Bing Wuqing couldn't help but be terrified and moved. She had fought seriously with Lin Yi before. During this period of time, she had long developed both respect and fear for Lin Yi. However, even though she had already raised Lin Yi's strength to an extremely high level, after personally experiencing Lin Yi's terrifying speed, which seemed to break through everything, she was still as shocked as Chu Tianlu. The limit of a human's speed could actually reach such an astounding level? Bing Wuqing's feelings were exactly the same as those of Lin Yi's lackeys. Following such a freak, her worldview would be refreshed from time to time. In the beginning, she would still make a fuss about nothing, but as time passed, she would gradually become used to it. "Boss, is there danger ahead?" After such a shock, even Bing Wuqing's tone was a little shaken. Cultivation was like climbing a mountain. Every time she climbed a mountain, she would be wild with joy, thinking that she had climbed to the top of the world. However, she would immediately be doused with a bucket of cold water, because there was always a higher mountain. After reaching the top, what she saw was a taller mountain and a wider world. He was in such a state now. Although the peak of the early nascent soul realm was not the top of the nascent soul realm, it was not far away. He could almost see the scenery of the top of the small ancient martial world with a single glance. However, now that Lin Yi had lifted the lid, he realized that he was basically a frog at the bottom of a well, just like everyone else. There was still a long way to go in the future. I don't know either, but I am sure of one thing. There is something extremely dangerous ahead, so we should avoid it if we can. Lin Yi's expression was a little solemn. The reason why he had suddenly taken the two of them and fled with all his might just now was because the jade pendant was frantically warning him. One had to know that the jade pendant's warning was very intelligent, and it would only warn him when there was a real threat to him. Under normal circumstances, most enemies would not even make a sound. Although the jade pendant had also warned him when he had discovered the sky-devouring giant crocodile, it was far less urgent than it was now. It was clear that the thing ahead was no small matter. The 9 malignant tumors of his primordial spirit had not been dealt with yet, and Lin Yi did not want to get into any more trouble. Bing Wuqing's heart trembled when she heard that. This Tai Shi Island was really not simple. Even someone as powerful as Lin Yi had to be so cautious. Chapter 54-28. He didn't dare to implicate Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing, but he had to go back himself, even if it cost him his life. You're so troublesome. Bing Wuqing frowned. She didn't have a good impression of Chu Tianlu in the first place, and now she felt that this guy didn't know what was good for him. In her opinion, they weren't friends at all. Since Chu Tianlu wanted to die, then let him die. Lin Yi admired him quite a bit. There weren't many people who could be so loyal these days. Chu Tianlu was a rare weirdo, and Lin Yi couldn't bear to watch him die. He could only smile bitterly and say, "Forget it. For the sake of the divine knowledge fruit, I'll go back and take a look. You guys stay here and don't come over. You don't have to. Brother Lin, you've already done everything you could for me. Hurry up and go. Don't worry about me. I'm just going to take a look. I'll help if I can, but if I can't, then forget it." "I won't do anything stupid on impulse," Chu Tianlu said sincerely. Bing Wuqing didn't say anything, but her expression didn't agree either. Her logic was very simple. It was meaningless to take risks for an outsider she didn't know, especially someone at Lin Yi's level. Just take a look. Do you have that ability? Lin Yi rolled his eyes at Chu Tianlu. With Chu Tianlu's insignificant strength, he'd basically lose his life if he took a look at something that even he was afraid of. Chu Tianlu blushed with shame. His words weren't exactly polite, but he had no room to refute them. He could only watch helplessly as Lin Yi abandoned him and Bing Wuqing, turned around, and went back. In the blink of an eye, he was already gone. Returning to where they were just now, even Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart when he saw the scene in front of him. Chu Tianlu's two friends were still screaming and running for their lives, but a dark mass was following closely behind them. At first glance, it looked like a dark cloud covering their heads, like a sandstorm. In terms of speed, it was much faster than the two of them, and it seemed that they couldn't escape anymore. At this moment, the tall man who was running in front had a ferocious look on his face. He suddenly pulled out his sword and sent a sharp sword chi behind him. He was forced into a dead end and had no other choice. However, he was not going to turn around and fight to the death with that black mass. His target was actually another young cultivator who was following closely behind him. They had been best friends for decades, and that person did not expect his best friend to be so vicious at such a critical moment of life and death. Two people were being chased by the same tiger. If they wanted to escape, they didn't need to be able to outrun the tiger. They just needed to be able to outrun the other person. This was a principle that everyone knew. It was just that he didn't expect this to happen to him. The sword chi came right at his head, and the young cultivator hurriedly dodged. The sword chi almost brushed past his scalp, cutting off a strand of his black hair. It was a dangerous situation, but it was not worth celebrating. Because he was dodging the sword chi, his footsteps unconsciously paused for a moment, and in that short moment, the black cloud behind him had already firmly enveloped him, and then, like maggots attached to a bone, a large ball firmly stuck to his body, unable to be removed, and he could no longer escape. At the same time, the tall man who escaped first did not get out of danger as expected. After all, it was not a tiger that was chasing them. The black cloud that enveloped the young cultivator split into two at the same time, but he did not fall behind at all. Instead, he chased even closer. A terrifying buzzing sound that made people's scalps numb sounded in his ears, getting closer and closer. Help! Help! The tall man saw the figure of Lin Yi in front of him and immediately thought that he had caught a life-saving straw. He quickly shouted. In this situation, if no one reached out to help, he would definitely die. Lin Yi looked on coldly. Before this, he had the intention to save him, but after seeing this guy's action just now, he completely gave up on this idea. This kind of person would be a disaster even if he was saved, so it was better to let him fend for himself. However, what really concerned Lin Yi was the layer of black cloud that covered the two of them. At first glance, it was a little difficult to see with the naked eye at a distance of tens of feet. He thought it was just a layer of strange black cloud, but if he looked closely, he would find that it was not a black cloud at all, but a large group of extremely tiny insects. At first glance, they looked a bit like beetles, but their bodies were much smaller, and each of them was black and shiny, as if they were wrapped in a layer of strange black grease. Once they were glued to them, they would be everywhere, including the 5 senses and 7 orifices, and even the pores and hair follicles of the whole body. They would crazily drill in, making a sizzling sound. As Lin Yi looked on coldly from the side, the two of them had already sunk into a final struggle. They had already been firmly entangled by these black insects, and had no chance of escaping. The only thing they could do was put up a final struggle. From afar, the two of them seemed to have gone mad as they beat their bodies with all their might. Even if they beat themselves to the point where their skin and flesh were lacerated, or even crazily vomiting blood, they still didn't care. You've both gone mad. In the end, Chu Tianlu still followed them over. When he saw this scene, he hurriedly went up to help. As a good friend of many years, he couldn't just watch the two of them mutilate themselves. Lin Yi extended his hand and stopped him. Open your eyes and look carefully. They're slapping the insects on their bodies. If I'm not mistaken, once these black insects attach themselves to a body, they will crazily drill into it. Even if they attach themselves to the outside, they will crazily suck blood. If you don't want to die, then stand there and don't move. Insects? Chu Tianlu was taken aback. Those black insects were practically indistinguishable to the naked eye, and with his strength at this distance, he couldn't see them clearly, let alone see as clearly as Lin Yi did. There are actually such terrifying insects in this world. It's really appalling. Bing Wuqing had also caught up. When she saw this scene, her expression changed. She had originally thought that with her current strength, she could go to any dangerous place in the immemorial underworld. She didn't expect this tiny Thai snake island to be so dangerous. The sky-devouring crocodile from before was already enough to kill her. The threat of these tiny black insects in front of her was even greater. Coming here to take risks, it was fine if one was lucky. But if one was unlucky and encountered the sky-devouring crocodile and the terrifying black insects one after another like they did, ordinary gold core and foundation establishment experts wouldn't be able to survive even if they had 10 lives. Seeing that the injuries of the two people in front of him were getting more and more serious, and even showing signs of bleeding from their 7 orifices, Chu Tianlu couldn't hold himself back anymore. He knew that he couldn't save the two of them. The only one who could possibly help him save the two of them was Lin Yi. However, Lin Yi had saved his life before. It was already extremely benevolent of him to agree to let him tag along. How could he have the face to ask Lin Yi to take such a huge risk for 2 unrelated outsiders? Chapter 54-29. Chu Tianlu clenched his teeth, as if he had made a great decision. He said in a low voice, "Brother Lin, although it's very shameless to say this, I beg you to help me. Don't worry, I won't let you risk your life for nothing. In return, I'll tell you a big secret." A big secret? Lin Yi looked at him a little playfully. He'd thought that Chu Tianlu wasn't a bad person, but he definitely wasn't an idiot with water in his head. He clearly had nothing to do, yet he insisted on going with the two of them. Didn't that mean he had nothing better to do? It should be known that even if he left by himself, as long as he was careful, he was actually quite sure that he could avoid Chu Tianliang. If he seized the opportunity, he could directly leave and return to the Middle Island. Why did he force himself to follow the two of them and take risks? Now, Lin Yi finally understood a little. Chu Tianlu looked at Lin Yi nervously, for fear that the other party would be indifferent. Fortunately, Lin Yi did not disappoint him. After a slight smile, he dashed forward in a flash. When they were dozens of feet away, these black insects did not take the initiative to target them for the time being. However, once Lin Yi approached, a part of them immediately stuck to him. That kind of crazy, close-range manner was really daunting. In particular, there was a trace of inexplicable pressure on them. It seemed that they were higher creatures, and human practitioners were just nutrients waiting for them to absorb. Boom! Lin Yi raised his hand and shot out a 5 elements murderous aura. The black insects immediately fell to the ground, but then they buzzed again. Not even one was killed on the ground. Lin Yi could not help but twitch his eyelids. Although the strength of his primordial spirit was not high, the 5 elements murderous aura was a very high-end martial arts technique after all. Its power was not trivial. It should not be that he could not even kill a small black insect, right? The truth was in front of him. No matter how speechless Lin Yi was, it was useless. Those glossy black insects seemed to be purely shaken by his 5 elements murderous aura and were not affected at all. Then, they pounced on him again without losing any momentum. As for Lin Yi, he seemed to be stunned. He just stood there, motionless, without dodging. "Brother Lin, danger." Upon seeing this, Chu Tianlu, who remained several dozen meters behind him, became extremely anxious. He had begged Lin Yi to help him, but he had never thought that he would have to make Lin Yi pay with his life here. He immediately felt endless regret in his heart. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have begged Lin Yi to help him. Wasn't this harming him? However, he could only look on helplessly, unable to do anything. As a result, after a large swarm of black insects pounced on Lin Yi, they directly passed through his body without any resistance. Although it looked like they were firmly trapped like the previous two people, they did not harm Lin Yi at all. They withstood the murderous aura of the 5 elements unscathed, and Lin Yi was also immune to their attacks. Chu Tianlu looked at this scene and was stunned. For words were clearly written on his face. "I don't understand, but I think it's awesome." He had no idea how Lin Yi did it, but this did not prevent him from sincerely admiring Lin Yi from the bottom of his heart. No matter where the strong went, they would be respected, and Chu Tianlu was no exception. Not far away, Chu Tianlu's 2 friends were still struggling. Seeing that they were about to reach the end, there was not much time left for Lin Yi to think about countermeasures. Not long after, Lin Yi suddenly raised his hand, and a fiery fist intent instantly surged and released from his fist. Wildfire Fist. Due to the limitation of the spirit's strength, during this period of time, Lin Yi always directly used spirit's moves like the soul hook hand, and tried to avoid these moves that needed to be performed with a physical body. Only in this way could he display the strength of the profound ascension stage. Otherwise, even if he was much stronger than ordinary experts of the foundation establishment stage, his strength would still be limited. Wildfire Fist was undoubtedly the simplest and most basic move among all his physical moves. In terms of power, it was much weaker than the murderous aura of the 5 elements. Normally, it would not be used at all. Logically speaking, these strange black insects in front of him could even easily withstand the power of the murderous aura of the 5 elements, let alone a mere wildfire fist. However, the result was shocking. A large swarm of black insects that were hit fell to the ground, but this time they did not fly up unscathed like before. Instead, they became charred corpses, and the air was confused with an inexplicable strong burnt smell. So afraid of fire? Even Lin Yi himself was surprised. Most insects were afraid of fire, but he was just giving it a try, and did not have much hope. He did not expect the effect to be so outstanding. At this time, Bing Wuqing also came over. If even Lin Yi was helpless against these black insects, with his style, he would definitely stand far away and not get involved in this mess. However, now that it was proven that these black insects were not without weaknesses, there was no need for him to stay far away from them. Logically speaking, since these black insects were so afraid of fire, they must be very afraid of the cold as well. His merciless ice force, which he was best at, came in handy. As expected, once merciless ice force was activated, a large swarm of black insects fell to the ground around Bing Wuqing. They were all frozen black insects. It looked like it was much more effective than Lin Yi's frenzied fire fist. After all, he was an expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, and the range of merciless ice force was much larger than that of a mere frenzied fire fist, so the effect was naturally more immediate. However, before Bing Wuqing could be a little complacent, the black insects that had been frozen into ice began to move. They were not frozen to death, but were only temporarily trapped by the ice, and would soon break out of it. Not long after, a large swarm of black insects once again rose into the air, unscathed. This time, they clearly focused their attention on Bing Wuqing. Bing Wuqing's heart tightened, and she could not help but think to herself that she had miscalculated. If she had known this would happen, she would not have rushed up recklessly. After all, she was not a pure primordial spirit like Lin Yi, whose body could transform into a primordial spirit at any time and was completely immune to the black insects' attacks. If she was really surrounded by these black insects, she would not end up any better than the other two unlucky fellows. Get out of my way. Lin Yi shook his head. There were indeed a lot of black insects in front of him, and they were practically overwhelming at close range. Although the effect of his frenzied fire fist was outstanding, the problem was that it did not cover a large area. On top of that, these black insects were extremely fast and could be evaded easily. If he were to simply rely on his frenzied fire fist to attack them, he would probably not be able to kill them all by nightfall. By then, the people around him would have all died. However, since it was proven that fire-type martial arts techniques were effective, Lin Yi's methods were naturally not limited to the frenzied fire fist. After all, he had quite a number of fire-type techniques. Chapter 54:30. Of course, Lin Yi didn't know any cloning techniques. At this moment, he was actually using a fire-type technique that he hadn't used for a long time. It was the modified version of Mu Linsun's 1,000 transformations, Mu Linsun's frenzied fire fist. The black insects fell in large numbers again, and the burnt smell in the air was several times stronger than before. The effect was much better than the frenzied fire fist, as the clones closed in and greatly limited the black insect's space to escape. This move alone was dozens of times more effective than before. But this was far from enough. Although some of the black insects were killed, they seemed to be gathering from afar. Not only did their numbers not decrease, but they were also becoming more and more intense. The already irritating buzzing sound became even more earth-shattering. Not only the two unlucky fellows, but even Bing Wuqing, who had joined the battle, and Chu Tianlu, who was watching from afar, were in imminent danger. Bing Wuqing began to panic. Although the effect of Lin Yi's Mu Linsun's frenzied fire fist was inspiring, the current situation was not optimistic. She was a little regretful that she had advanced too rashly. If she had stayed at Chu Tianlu's position, she could have easily escaped with her strength. Unfortunately, she had been too impulsive just now. She knew that she didn't leave a good impression on Lin Yi, especially with the stain of leaving someone to die in the river of divine knowledge. Now that Lin Yi had advanced to the next level, she had to find a way to perform well in front of Lin Yi. Only then would she be truly trusted and obtain more benefits, such as the golden nascent gathering pill. Bing Wuching, who was as calm and rational as she was, still had times when she miscalculated. More and more black insects appeared. She relied on the merciless ice force to freeze them into ice slags again and then watched them break out of the ice unscathed. Not only that, but after a few times, she was shocked to find that these black insects had developed an immunity to her merciless ice force. The time it took for them to freeze into ice slags became shorter and shorter, and some of them didn't even fall. They shook off the ice slags on the surface of their bodies in the air, and then continued to pounce ferociously with a buzzing sound. In such a short period of time, such an amazing ability to adapt, the black insect's innate talent was truly astounding. It had far surpassed common sense. In this way, not only was Bing Wuching unable to deal with these black insects, but she was also gradually losing the ability to rescue herself. If she were to end up like those two unlucky fellows and the black insects burrowed into her skin, her only outcome would be to bleed from her orifices until she completely collapsed. At this moment, Bing Wuching wished more than anything that she was a fire elemental expert. Even if she was only in the foundation establishment stage, even if she couldn't kill as easily as Lin Yi, she would at least be able to protect herself. But now, as a dignified expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, she was actually being tormented by a swarm of black worms to the point of being helpless. It was truly unbelievable. On the other hand, after Lin Yi had performed Mu Linsen's frenzy fists a few times, the ground around him was littered with the carcasses of the black insects. It looked like he had made a lot of progress, but it was a pity that he could not keep up with the number of black insects that were rushing toward him. Not only that, these black insects seemed to have a high level of intelligence. When they realized that they posed no threat to Lin Yi at all, and would only suffer one-sided abuse instead, they all turned around and turned toward Bing Wuching and the others. The situation was getting more and more dangerous. Wuching, take Chu Tianlu away from here, Lin Yi instructed in a low voice. At this moment, Chu Tianlu had not been completely entangled by the black insects, and Bing Wuching could rely on the merciless ice aura to resist them for a short while, so there was still a chance for her to escape. As for Chu Tianlu's two unlucky friends, they had long been tortured to death by the black insects, and there was no way they could escape. Bing Wuching was stunned. She had already planned to escape, and now that she heard Lin Yi's instructions, she retreated without hesitation. She even brought Chu Tianlu, who was watching nervously from a short distance away. His speed was far from that of a freak like Lin Yi, and his speed was not his forte either. But after all, his level of strength was still there, and he was still many times faster than someone like Chu Tianlu. When Bing Wuching and Chu Tianlu were a little further away, Lin Yi took a deep breath. His entire body was surging with heat, and even the air around him began to distort. It was as if his entire person was about to melt on the spot. Gathering his aura, Lin Yi suddenly threw a punch at the void in front of him. At first glance, it did not look any different from before. It was still the frenzied fire fist, but this time, there were fire crystals in the air that were hard to see with the naked eye. A single frenzied fire fist was like a line of fire that ignited a bag of explosives. These fire crystals exploded with a loud bang almost at the same time, and the deafening booms rang out incessantly, shaking the earth and mountains. Hiss! In the distance, Bing Wuching and Chu Tianlu gasped at the same time, their eyes filled with shock. Not to mention Chu Tianlu, even Bing Wuching had never seen a move that covered such a large area. In an instant, the area in front of them had become a sea of fire hell. It was no wonder that Lin Yi had asked the two of them to retreat, or they would definitely die in there. Frenzied Fire Thousand Bursts Fist. Such a high-level, explosive move could be said to be as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns in the immemorial martial world. In fact, with the strength of Lin Yi's primordial spirit, it was actually very difficult for him to use this move. Although it was not as profound and exquisite as the killing aura of the five elements, it was still extremely demanding on his physical strength. Otherwise, he would not even be able to condense fire crystals, let alone the frenzied fire thousand bursts. Lin Yi had completely relied on the powerful primordial spirit of his profound ascension middle stage primordial spirit to force his primordial spirit to use a move that exceeded its upper limit. That was how the scene before them had happened. The concentrated sounds of explosions quickly died down. Everything in front of them was red, and the air was filled with scorching flames. It was only when these flames dissipated with the wind that Bing Wuqing and Chu Tianlu stared at the scene before them, dumbfounded. The overwhelming swarm of black insects had completely disappeared. In their place were layers upon layers of corpses on the ground, and the air was filled with a pungent smell of burnt flesh. The terrifying swarm of black insects that had almost driven them to a dead end had been dealt with by a single punch from Lin Yi. It sounded unbelievable, but this was the truth that had been laid out in front of them. Ugh! Not far away, a cry of pain came from the pile of black insect corpses. A person struggled to climb to his feet. His body was riddled with wounds, and there were also some burn marks, but they were not obvious. Although the frenzied fire thousand bursts was not completely controllable, it was not as if there was no control at all. This was especially true when one's primordial spirit was at a higher level, and one's ability to control various details was stronger. A profound ascension middle stage primordial spirit like Lin Yi could be said to have a strategic advantage. Even if the difficulty was increased because it was not his main body, it was unlikely that he would accidentally kill Chu Tianlu's two unlucky friends. Of course, some burns were unavoidable. Otherwise, even if he dealt with the black insect swarm in the air, the insects that were stuck to their bodies would not be completely removed, and the only outcome would be death. Chapter 54:31. However, the two of them were still very thankful. No matter how miserable they were, they still survived and escaped the calamity. Brother Jingzi, Brother Qingfeng, are you all right? Chu Tianlu hurriedly ran over. He truly cared about these two friends of his, and was completely unaware of the scene that had just occurred. If he knew that his friend's moral qualities were comparable to Chu Tianliang's, he probably wouldn't be so nervous. I'm all right. The tall man called by Jingzi glanced at the person behind him with an extremely unnatural expression. His previous actions had almost completely offended this companion of his. Putting himself in their shoes, if he was the other person, he would definitely not stop once he caught his breath. Fortunately, the other Zhang Qingfeng didn't look in his direction. Instead, he was half lying on the ground, panting. He was the first victim of the black insects, and his injuries were far more serious than Bai Jingzi's. Of course, he was also in a more sorry state. That's good, that's good. Chu Tianlu was so concerned that he completely didn't notice that something was wrong. He carefully helped the two of them up, and generously gave them the clan's healing medicine he had brought with him. Although it wasn't a holy medicine, it was very effective for external injuries. However, he didn't bring much this time. He used half and gave the other half to the two of them. In this way, he didn't even have his own spare medicine. Thank you, Bai Jingzi said with a pale face. On the other side, Zhang Qingfeng didn't say anything. He just silently allowed Chu Tianlu to help him apply the medicine. His head was lowered so that no one could see his expression. We've grown up together. What's there to thank me for? Chu Tianlu frowned to express his dissatisfaction, then asked, didn't the two of you say you wanted to go to the snake's head to take a look? How did you provoke these insects? The terrain of Tai Snake Island, from the lowest snake's tail to the highest snake's head, could be seen at a glance. Normal people would want to climb to the top of the snake's head after coming here, but there were very few people who could reach that step. Although the terrain was simple, it could only ensure that they wouldn't get lost, but it didn't mean that they could easily walk through it. In terms of the small pugilistic world of the far ancient era, there were almost no weaklings who came here. But for Tai Shi Island, even a nascent soul-old monster like Bing Wuqing might not be enough, let alone those golden core stage or even foundation building stage cultivators. If one wanted to reach the snake head's position, apart from necessary strength, the most important thing was luck. If one's luck wasn't good, everything else would be useless. Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng's luck clearly wasn't all that great. If it weren't for Chu Tianlu's pleading, they would already be two corpses that were too horrible to look at. Zhang Qingfeng still didn't say anything. Bai Jingze glanced at him and explained, "Actually, it's nothing. We just accidentally provoked them along the way." "How unlucky, accidentally." Chu Tianlu was stunned for a moment, his eyes filled with disbelief. As for Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing beside him, they didn't believe his words at all. Accidentally provoking so many terrifying black insects? Was he trying to fool a child? No matter how ferocious and terrifying a spirit beast was, as long as it didn't actively attack it or enter its core territory, it wouldn't take the initiative to attack human cultivators. After all, they all had spiritual intelligence. In this era where human cultivators were the dominant force, no spirit beast would recklessly make an enemy out of humans, let alone act as crazily as the swarm of black insects just now to the point of disregarding the consequences. Anyone could see that Bai Jingze was being perfunctory. Strictly speaking, it wasn't really an accident. The main thing was that we saw a heaven and earth treasure, so we subconsciously approached it. We didn't expect something to happen. Bai Jingze hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. "What heaven and earth treasure?" Lin Yi asked casually. Heaven and earth treasures were always guarded by spirit beasts, especially the rarer the treasure, the more troublesome and fierce the spirit beasts around it. This was common sense. Judging from the terrifying swarm of black insects just now, the level of the heaven and earth treasure was definitely not simple. It must be a rare treasure in the world. This, actually, I don't know either. I don't know much about elixirs, but it seems to be worth some spirit jade. Bai Jingze was still trying to hide the truth from them. Don't play dumb. At this moment, Zhang Qingfeng, who had been silent since the beginning, suddenly spoke. His words were shocking. "We saw the spirit knowledge fruit." Spirit knowledge fruit? Lin Yi and the other two were all shocked. Bai Jingze couldn't help but frown at Zhang Qingfeng, very dissatisfied. Was this guy crazy? How could he reveal such important information to others? In his mind, he didn't have the slightest notion of repaying Lin Yi for saving them. He only had one thing on his mind, and that was to be able to find the fruit of consciousness. It was a great opportunity given to him by the heavens, and no one could take it away from him. Zhang Qingfeng originally did not want to easily reveal the spirit knowledge fruit to Lin Yi and the others. If possible, he would be happy to share the spirit knowledge fruit with Bai Jingze. Unfortunately, after the scene just now, a huge gap had appeared between the two of them. Even if it was just to vent his anger, he would never let Bai Jingze succeed. Wasn't there only one spirit knowledge fruit? Chu Tianlu looked surprised. Of all the people present, he should be the one who had done the most homework in this regard. There was only one spirit knowledge fruit at any one time. This was the conclusion he came to. The previous heaven-devouring giant crocodile's performance had also indirectly confirmed this point. The spirit knowledge fruit in the underground cave had obviously been taken away by Lin Yi, so how could another one have appeared? Could you have mistaken it for someone else? Lin Yi asked. He was worried that one spirit knowledge fruit wouldn't be enough. If there really was another one, it couldn't be better. How could I have mistaken it for someone else? It's shaped like a snake's gallbladder and has so many terrifying black insects guarding it. If it isn't a spirit knowledge fruit, what could it be? Zhang Qingfeng shook his head. Anyone who came here basically came for the spirit knowledge fruit, and he was naturally no exception. He might not know about other natural treasures, but it was impossible for him to not recognize the spirit knowledge fruit. Lin Yi and Chu Tianlu looked at each other, pausing for a moment before taking out the spirit knowledge fruit from the jade pendant space and asking, "Is it this one?" Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng were stunned when they saw it, both of them swallowing a mouthful of saliva. Their eyes couldn't help showing greed, especially Bai Jingze, whose eyes almost fell out of their sockets. Fortunately, although he was envious, he did not lose his reason. They had seen Lin Yi's performance just now, and with that kind of strength, even if they were given 10,000 times more courage, they would not dare to snatch it. It's this one, the spirit knowledge fruit we saw is exactly the same as this one. Since Zhang Qingfeng had already revealed it, Bai Jingze could no longer continue to hide it and could only nod. Chapter 54-32. Chu Tianlu's knowledge of the spirit knowledge fruit came from the family's ancient books. Could it be that it was written wrong? But that was not right. Even if the ancient books were wrong, the giant sky-devouring crocodile had no reason to help deceive people, right? Lin Yi also fell into deep thought. Logically speaking, it was unlikely that a heavenly treasure like the spirit knowledge fruit would appear at the same time, but nothing was absolute. Perhaps something had happened. In any case, since he knew there was a second spirit knowledge fruit, Lin Yi could not ignore it. He was still counting on this thing to help him completely resolve the 9 spirit tumors. In that case, please lead the way. Although it was a request, Lin Yi's tone was unquestionable. Not to mention that he had saved their lives, even if they did not know each other. In this world where strength was respected, the other party would not dare to refuse. Bai Jingze was somewhat reluctant. He had been planning to sneak back, but now his plan had failed. The key was that he had almost torn all pretense of cordiality with Zhang Qingfeng. He did not even have the chance to respond perfunctorily, so he could only obediently lead the way. Their destination wasn't far. After all, with the speed of the Black Swarm, and Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng were only experts at the great circle of Foundation establishment, being able to escape this far was already their limit. Any further and they wouldn't be able to escape. Along the way, they encountered some scattered black insects from time to time. There were not many of them, but if Lin Yi was not present, the others would probably have a headache. None of them could use fire attribute martial skills, so there was no way to deal with them. But now it was simple. Lin Yi could easily open a path with a frenzied fist. Not long after, the group of 5 came to a rather secluded and remote place. The terrain of Tai Snake Island was simple. Under the cover of the dense forest, there were many places that were rarely known. If they did not come here by chance, ordinary people would not find it even if they walked along the path 10 times. That's it. Bai Jingze stopped, and Zhang Qingfeng did the same. They pointed a direction for Lin Yi and the others. There was nothing eye-catching in front of them. There were no towering trees, no exotic flowers or plants. At first glance, it was just a clump of ordinary weeds, but under the cover of the weeds, there was a faint bright red outline. The stench of snakes. It really is the spirit knowledge fruit. Chu Tianlu was stunned at a glance. He did not believe it on the way here, thinking that it might just be somewhat similar to the spirit knowledge fruit, but after smelling the iconic snake-like smell, he no longer had any doubts. There was no doubt that this was a genuine spirit knowledge fruit. Lin Yi was also a bit dumbfounded. He was the same as Chu Tianlu. Although he held quite a bit of hope in his heart, he didn't really believe it rationally. Now, however, seeing it with his own eyes was the truth. In such a remote place, with such a ferocious swarm of black insects guarding it, it's no wonder no one has discovered this spiritual knowledge fruit. Bing Wuqing's tone could be considered calm. She no longer coveted the spirit knowledge fruit. Even if Lin Yi offered it to her, she would not take it. For her, the spirit knowledge fruit was far less cost-effective than a top-grade gathering nascent pill. Moreover, she could use this to leave a good impression in Lin Yi's heart that she was not a glutton, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Bing Wuqing was not tempted, but it did not mean that the others were not tempted. Chu Tianlu was still fine. A truly loyal person would normally know how to repay kindness, especially since he also knew his own limits. Therefore, he was only surprised by the second spirit knowledge fruit in front of him, but did not have any improper thoughts. However, this was not the case for the other 2, especially Bai Jingze. Before this, his entire mind was filled with thoughts of secretly keeping the spirit knowledge fruit for himself. Now that his beautiful plan had been shattered, he could only settle for the next best thing. Although Lin Yi's life-saving grace could not be denied, this was a completely different matter. As for Zhang Qingfeng, although he was now prepared to shed all pretense of cordiality with Bai Jingze, his stance on this matter was more or less the same. They had only discovered this spirit knowledge fruit because of the smoke from their ancestors' graves. If Lin Yi really took it for himself and did not get a share of the spirit knowledge fruit, he would definitely be extremely indignant and would definitely curse. Without waiting for Lin Yi to speak, Bai Jingze could not wait to snatch the spirit knowledge fruit. Zhang Qingfeng was not willing to fall behind either. It was unrealistic to keep it for himself, but as long as the first to obtain the spirit knowledge fruit, Lin Yi would have to pay some price even if he asked for it, so they would not be left empty-handed. You guys. Chu Tianlu opened his mouth, wanting to stop them, but he didn't know what to do. As far as he was concerned, the fruit should belong to Lin Yi alone. Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng really didn't know what was good for them. They'd just been saved by Lin Yi, and they were still heavily injured. Why did they have to be so impatient? Lin Yi was not surprised at all. From the first time he saw these two people, he already knew that they had bad intentions. Although birds of a feather flock together, Chu Tianlu obviously did not make the right friends. The two people's actions at this time only confirmed his view of people. Wait. Don't act rashly. Lin Yi stopped them in a low voice. Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng's expressions suddenly became a bit unsightly, but in the end they did not lose their reason, and reluctantly stopped. They were only 3 steps away from the spirit knowledge fruit. If they moved forward a little more, they would be able to obtain it. Unfortunately, they did not dare to. After seeing the 1,000 wild flame fists just now, normal people would not have the thought of becoming enemies with Lin Yi, let alone the two of them who were quite seriously injured. However, they still did not give up. Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng looked at each other, temporarily putting aside their previous dirty thoughts. In the face of benefits, they once again stood on the same line. Brother Lin, you dealt with the black insects, and just now you also saved us. We will never forget this great kindness, but this is a different thing. Without us leading the way, you would not have found this spirit knowledge fruit. According to the rules of Jianghu, you should at least give us some, right? Bai Jingze said with a dissatisfied expression. You don't know what's good for you. Without waiting for Lin Yi to speak, Bing Wuqing directly used her merciless ice force to freeze him into a human-shaped popsicle. She would never talk nonsense with such scum, and she had a belly full of anger from the black insects just now. Brother Bing, wait. Let's talk this out. Chu Tianlu was shocked when he saw this, and hurriedly stepped forward to stop her. At the same time, he desperately winked at Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng. It was not easy to beg Lin Yi to save these two friends. If they were killed because of this kind of thing, wouldn't it all be in vain? Bing Wuqing ignored him. In her eyes, Chu Tianlu did not carry any weight at all. If he also did not know what was good for him, she did not mind killing him as well. Chapter 54-33. At the profound ascension stage, one's state of mind had gradually become calm, especially since Lin Yi was not a bloodthirsty person. As long as someone did not provoke him and deserved to die, he would not easily make a move. Thank you for your generosity, Brother Lin. Chu Tianlu breathed a sigh of relief. His back was covered with a layer of cold sweat. Bing Wuqing was notoriously difficult to negotiate with. If Lin Yi had not stopped her, he and his two friends would have been 3 lifeless human ice sculptures by now. Lin Yi shook his head noncommittally and looked at them without saying a word. Chu Tianlu hurriedly tugged at Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng's sleeves and desperately winked at them. At this time, they just had to give in and express their stance. After all, they were facing an existence comparable to a nascent soul-stage-old monster, or even more unfathomable. Under normal circumstances, people like them could only kneel and lick each other's boots. They did not even have the chance to talk to each other as equals, let alone be stubborn. However, he still underestimated the appeal of the spirit fruit to them. If Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng were to be described in one word, it would be blinded by greed. Of course, this also had to do with the fact that they did not know Lin Yi's specific strength. They had not seen the scene where Lin Yi killed the sky-devouring giant crocodile. Although the raging fire thousand explosive fist looked exaggerated, under Lin Yi's deliberate control, it did not cause much harm to them. As for those terrifying black insects, in their opinion, they were just afraid of fire. Any fire-type expert in the Foundation establishment stage could probably kill them. The reason why they were so difficult to deal with was simply that they were not on the right path. While they were brainwashing themselves with these self-deceiving thoughts, they had never thought that if Lin Yi's strength was really only at this level, why would the great Bing Wuqing listen to his words? She was not only a super genius who had been famous for a while, but also a newly advanced nascent soul stage old monster. Brother Tianlu, why don't you help us out, this? Bai Jingze rubbed his hands. He was indeed scared out of his wits just now, but since Lin Yi was soft-hearted and did not want Bing Wuqing to kill the two of them, in his opinion, this was a ready-made opportunity to get a piece of the pie. As the saying goes, fortune comes from danger. Ah. Chu Tianlu was stupefied. In his previous understanding, Bai Jingze wasn't someone who didn't know when to advance or retreat. Heaven's road, we are all friends, seeing that your relationship with them is not bad, help us say something fair. Zhang Qingfeng whispered as well. However, since they were standing so close to each other, no matter how softly he spoke, Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing could hear him clearly. Lin Yi could not help but find this scene funny. When he saw Chu Tianlu's awkward appearance, he said, "Could it be that you think that the knowledge fruit is placed in front of you, that you can pick it at will, and that there's not even the slightest danger? What danger could there be?" Bai Jingze and Su Mo glanced at each other. A normal person would think that since they had already dealt with the black insects, the terrifying guardian spirit beasts, there would naturally not be any other dangers. Now, it was time to reap the harvest. What do you guys think? Lin Yi crossed his arms and smiled faintly. If you don't dare to pick it, then I'll go. Bai Jingze was still silently cursing this guy in his heart. This guy was indeed not very good. He was so timid that it was obvious that he lacked confidence. As he spoke, he was afraid that Lin Yi would go back on his word, so he hurriedly reached out to pick the knowledge fruit. I'll do it. Zhang Qingfeng did not fall behind, and hurriedly rushed over. Hey! You too! Chu Tianlu reached out to stop them, not only because he was afraid that the two would offend Lin Yi, but also because he felt that this matter was a little abnormal. Unfortunately, the two were already blinded by greed, and he could not stop them at all. The two rushed to be first regardless of their injuries, and almost fell together. Unexpectedly, just as they were about to snatch the knowledge fruit, Zhang Qingfeng suddenly screamed, "Ah! What's wrong?" Chu Tianlu was shocked, and hurriedly asked with concern. I don't know either. I just felt my hand being pricked by something, and it hurt like hell. But now it doesn't hurt anymore. Zhang Qingfeng explained. As he spoke, he opened his palm to take a look. A tiny red dot had appeared on his palm, and it was almost impossible to notice if one did not look carefully. Looks like there's a thorn. Although he said this, Bai Jingze did not care about this. Instead, he was somewhat gloating. This way, no one would be able to snatch it from him. In the end, before he could touch the knowledge fruit, he suddenly screamed, lowered his head, and stretched out his hand to take a look. There was also a tiny red dot on his hand. Where is this thorn? Bai Jingze was a little confused, and Zhang Qingfeng was also dumbfounded. If there was a thorn on the knowledge fruit, they did not see it at all. Could this thorn be invisible? But just now, Lin Yi showed them that there was clearly nothing on the knowledge fruit. They did not understand what had happened because their strength was too weak. But Lin Yi saw it clearly. Just now, when the two of them reached out to pluck the fruit, an extremely thin needle suddenly extended from the knowledge fruit. It looked like the stinger of some kind of insect, and its speed was so fast that it made one's hair stand on end. It was far beyond the level of the ancient underworld, and even Lin Yi could not help but feel ashamed of his inferiority. Beside him, Bing Wuqing could not help but be moved. Although her strength could not be compared to Lin Yi's, she still had good eyesight. Even if she did not see it as clearly as Lin Yi, she could more or less understand what had happened. She could not help but sneer inwardly. Boss Lin Yi had clearly said that this thing was dangerous, but the two of them still insisted on snatching it. They really did not know what was good for them. Brother Lin, did you see something? Chu Tianlu could only smile bitterly and step forward to smooth things over. Lin Yi glanced at him, and said indifferently, "This is not the knowledge fruit." What? Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng cried out at the same time. Even Chu Tianlu looked stunned. This thing clearly looked like the knowledge fruit, and it also had the characteristic snake-like smell of the knowledge fruit. If this thing was not the knowledge fruit, what else could it be? This is not the knowledge fruit? Then what is it? Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng clearly did not believe him. They were sure that Lin Yi wanted to take the knowledge fruit for himself, so he deliberately made such an alarmist statement to scare them away. I don't know. Lin Yi shook his head. This was the truth. Until now, he still could not see what this thing was. He could only judge from the scene just now that this thing was definitely not the knowledge fruit, but a trap with thorns. Chapter 54-34. Lin Yi smiled indifferently and said casually, "If you're not afraid of death, go ahead and pick it. I won't stop you." Really? Bai Jingze was skeptical. He was purely gauging the heart of a gentleman with his own mean measure. If Lin Yi strongly stopped him, he would definitely snatch the spirit knowledge fruit at all costs. However, now that Lin Yi had expressed his stance, he was a little uncertain. Brother Jingze, Brother Qingfeng, although I can't explain why, my intuition tells me that this thing is not normal. It's best that you two don't act rashly. Maybe there really is a problem, Chu Tianlu advised. This. All right. Zhang Qingfeng hesitated for a moment before nodding in agreement. But we can't just give up like this, right? Bai Jingze was retreating, but he was still extremely unwilling. The legendary spirit knowledge fruit was so close at hand. If he just left like this, it would probably be a lifelong regret. In that case, let's just settle down here and wait and see. Lin Yi also wanted to figure out the details of this thing, so he did not mind spending 1 or 2 more days here. Bing Wuqing had no objections, and Chu Tianlu naturally had no objections either. However, Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng were a little reluctant. Until now, the two of them still felt that this was the spirit knowledge fruit in front of them, and that Lin Yi was deliberately mystifying things to make the two of them retreat in the face of difficulties so that he could take it for himself. However, since things had come to this, they could not object and could only stay here. No matter what, they would never leave without getting a share of the loot. The 5 of them settled down not far away. Camping out in the wild was a common thing for cultivators like them. As long as they were a little more careful and avoided the threat of those nocturnal spirit beasts, everything else was not a problem. Lin Yi reclined on the trunk of a nearby tree, and the others did the same. Not only was it more comfortable, but it also allowed them to see the situation below clearly, especially the suspected spirit knowledge fruit. Among everyone present, the ones who cared the most about this spiritual knowledge fruit were none other than Bai Jingze and Lin Yi. Bai Jingze was afraid that Lin Yi would play some tricks and secretly pick the spiritual knowledge fruit in the middle of the night when he wasn't paying attention. Then, if Lin Yi denied it, he would suffer a great loss. However, he also knew that it was impossible for him to keep an eye on Lin Yi on his own. His injuries were not light. Although he had applied ointment, it was inevitable that he would be sleepy and lost in thought after resting. He needed to find an ally who was on the same side as him. There was no need to consider Bing Wuqing. She was obviously in cahoots with Lin Yi. As for Chu Tianlu, he couldn't figure out what kind of relationship he had with Lin Yi. Moreover, based on Chu Tianlu's character, the possibility of him agreeing to such a thing was almost zero. After thinking about it, Bai Jingze could only lock his target as an ally to Zhang Qingfeng in the end. Although there was a grudge between them and there was a deep estrangement from the beginning, Zhang Qingfeng was the only person present who was on the same side as him. There was no one else besides him. Qingfeng, I know you're angry about what happened before, but I was really panicking at that time. I was blinded by fear and couldn't determine your position at all. I subconsciously attacked behind me. Really, I just wanted to see if I could kill those insects. I really didn't aim at you. We've been brothers for so many years, you must believe me. Bai Jingze moved closer and explained in a low voice. Is that so? Zhang Qingfeng glanced at him and replied with a sneer, if you really don't have a guilty conscience, why are you explaining all this to me? Bai Jingze just casually said a few words and he believed him. Did he really think that Zhang Qingfeng was a 3-year-old child? In that situation, it was obvious that the other party wanted to use him as a meat shield to attract the swarm of black insects so that he could escape easily. If Zhang Qingfeng couldn't even see this clearly, then he deserved to be tricked to death. I'm just afraid that you have a knot in your heart. Bai Jingze said with a guilty conscience. Humph, Zhang Qingfeng snorted coldly, glancing at Lin Yi and the others not far away who were squinting their eyes and pretending to sleep, whispering, don't pretend in front of me, I already know what kind of person you are. Hee hee, you want me to cooperate with you to secretly steal that spiritual knowledge fruit, am I right? Bai Jingze blushed with shame for a moment, but then he returned to normal and nodded, solemnly saying, yes, the spiritual knowledge fruit is right in front of you. I don't think you want to miss it and let others take it for themselves, right? No matter what kind of misunderstanding there is between the two of us, the fertile water can't flow into the fields of outsiders. What do you think? Humph, a villain is a villain. Zhang Qingfeng curled his lips disdainfully. Bai Jingze's expression suddenly became a little ugly, but then he heard Zhang Qingfeng ask, what are you going to do? He now deeply hated Bai Jingze, but there was one thing he had in common with Bai Jingze. He also coveted the spiritual knowledge fruit in front of him, and Bai Jingze's proposal was actually exactly what he wanted. In fact, even if Bai Jingze did not take the initiative to propose it, he would still put down his pride and join forces with the other party. After all, if he was alone, no matter what tricks he wanted to play, he would be too weak. Bai Jingze's mouth curled up as he calmly looked at Lin Yi and the others not far away, lowering his voice to a whisper. Our Bai family has a unique family secret skill called night concealment. As long as it is used at night, it can completely hide in the darkness, and ordinary people will not be able to detect it. Since you have such a method, why did you come to me? Zhang Qingfeng frowned. If the night concealment was really as amazing as Bai Jingze said, he could easily steal the spiritual knowledge fruit by himself. There was no need for him to ask for help. The night concealment can indeed hide from their eyes and ears, but look at them, each more vigilant than the other. Once I use the night concealment, they will immediately discover that I have disappeared. Wouldn't that be a disaster? Bai Jingze continued to mouthful. Then what do you want to do? Zhang Qingfeng asked. It just so happens that you know the illusion technique. Although the illusions you make are easy to see through during the day, in this kind of night with only weak moonlight, it is enough to pass off as the real thing. While I use the night concealment, you can use the illusion technique to make me appear to confuse their sight. Wouldn't that be enough? Bai Jingze suggested with glowing eyes. He had already thought of this step from the very beginning. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to Zhang Qingfeng in the first place. Chapter 54-35. Don't worry, I know what's important. When the time comes, you can just casually tell them and they will be exposed. How would I dare to take it all for myself? You can rest assured that I will never let you suffer a loss. How about we split it in half? Bai Jingze vowed solemnly, as if he had already forgotten the scene of the other party almost dying during the day. Of course, Bai Jingze did not believe him, but what he said was also reasonable. If the other party really had the courage to take it all for himself, he would not have come to him to cooperate. He immediately nodded and said, "I'll believe you for the last time." The two discussed in a low voice for a while, looking at the night sky above their heads. When a dark cloud blocked the moonlight, Bai Jingze took action. Putting aside everything else, the Bai family's ancestral night concealment technique was indeed commendable. Not only did it allow one to completely blend into the night, leaving no traces behind, it even concealed one's aura. At the same time, it could also escape the perception of divine sense to a certain extent, making it impossible for ordinary people to detect it. It was a pity that the Lin Yi they were facing was not an ordinary person. No matter how exquisite the Bai family's night concealment technique was, it was simply a joke in front of his profound ascension middle-stage soul. After all, the gap between them was too great, and this was not something that could be made up for by any technical means. In fact, although Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng had been very careful and almost only talked with their mouths, Lin Yi had long seen all of this. Whether it was Bai Jingze's night concealment technique or Zhang Qingfeng's illusion technique, in his eyes, they were full of flaws. He just watched coldly from the sidelines and did not directly stand up to expose them. At this moment, Bai Jingze, who had entered the state of night concealment technique, still thought that no one was aware of him. He was carefully approaching the divine sense fruit. Along the way, he was extremely cautious and kept his hands and feet as light as possible. Even if it was inevitable that the weeds under his feet would deform, he would find ways to suppress all these movements to a minimum. Bai Jingze showed extreme patience at this time. Every step he took was as much as possible in order to perfectly cover his own movements. Even though Lin Yi found it funny, he could not help but feel that although this guy was shameless, he really had some skills. It was less than 10 meters, but Bai Jingze had to spend a whole hour before he finally reached the edge of the fruit. He looked carefully at the group's position. It seemed that they'd really been fooled by Zhang Qingfeng's wood illusions. They didn't notice anything at all. He was so close to success, and he felt a surge of excitement in his heart. While he was observing the reactions of Lin Yi and the others, he was completely unaware that a tail needle had quietly extended out from beneath the divine sense fruit that he coveted. It was pitch black and restrained, without emitting any dim light. It was like a beast that was holding its breath and lying dormant, completely integrated with the darkness. Lin Yi raised his eyebrows slightly. He had already seen it during the day, but now he could see it more clearly. It was obvious that this thing was not a divine sense fruit at all, but a living thing. Ah! A painful howl broke the silence of the night on Tai Snake Island. A flock of birds flew out of the surrounding dense forest. Lin Yi had already expected this, and Bing Wuqing had obviously noticed it beforehand. Only Chu Tianlu woke up from his daze and almost fell off the tree trunk. What's going on? Chu Tianlu was shocked. Immediately, he saw a figure jumping and howling in pain near the divine sense fruit. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it was Bai Jingze. He hurriedly went forward and asked, "Brother Jingze, what's wrong?" Zhang Qingfeng, who was beside him, hurriedly withdrew his illusion technique and ran over. When he saw Bai Jingze's right hand, his expression changed drastically. Unlike during the day, Bai Jingze's right hand was no longer a small red dot. Instead, it was dripping with blood. In just a moment, the tail needle had pricked him at least 1,000 times. The intensity of the frequency and the speed were shocking. Even Lin Yi was left speechless. It seemed that the same tail needle was much more aggressive at night than during the day. Bai Jingze was still howling in pain. Zhang Qingfeng was overjoyed at the scene. Too much. He was only responsible for creating the illusion to deceive Lin Yi and the others. If he had really come to steal the divine sense fruit with Bai Jingze, he would probably have ended up the same way. I got it. Chu Tianlu suddenly shouted, giving Lin Yi and the others a fright. They thought he had also been tricked, but in the end, they heard him say, I got it. This isn't the divine sense fruit. This is the illusory insect recorded in the ancient books. It's the mother of those black insects. Its nature is to disguise itself as various rare treasures of heaven and earth to attract prey, then poison them to death, and finally eat them. What? Poison? Bai Jingze, who had just felt a little better, was immediately shocked again. He hurriedly asked, "Is it really poisonous?" "I'm not too sure about this, but it's vaguely recorded in the ancient books." Chu Tianlu scratched his head and smiled bitterly. He had inadvertently seen it when he was looking through the information on the divine sense fruit. The memory was vague, and he had only skimmed over it. How could he know so clearly? What should I do? Bai Jingze's intestines were green with regret. Things had developed to this point. Even a fool would know that this wasn't the divine sense fruit at all, but the illusory insect that Chu Tianlu had mentioned. If he hadn't thought himself clever, how could he have fallen to this point? Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. It was too late to regret now. Looking at his bloody right hand, he could only look at Lin Yi helplessly, hoping that the other party could have a way to save him. Lin Yi didn't care about him at all. He waved his hand and said, "Since it's confirmed that this isn't the divine sense fruit, let's go." After speaking, Lin Yi turned and walked away. Bing Wuqing followed closely behind without saying anything. Chu Tianlu opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He patted Bai Jingze's shoulder, sighed, and followed Lin Yi's footsteps. He wasn't a person who couldn't tell good from bad. Bai Jingze would appear next to the illusory insect. Even if he used his toes, he could figure out what this guy was up to. This was called asking for it. Even if he was on his friend's side, he couldn't say anything. It was already good enough that he didn't scold Bai Jingze to draw a line with him. Zhang Qingfeng also hurriedly followed. In addition to rejoicing in his heart, he was gloating. He looked at Bai Jingze with eyes full of pleasure. This was called retribution. Sigh. Bai Jingze's face was bitter. He looked back at the divine sense fruit and felt his blood run cold. He could only sigh and follow the footsteps of the people in front of him. Chapter 54-36. Firstly, many spiritual beasts had nocturnal habits. It was very easy to run into them if they moved at this time. Secondly, their senses were obstructed at night. Even if there was danger, it was difficult to detect it, and it was easy to run into an iron plate. However, this wasn't a problem for Lin Yi. His divine sense was sufficient. As long as it wasn't voluntary, he had 100% certainty of avoiding all dangers. Of course, with his situation, there probably wasn't much that could be said to be truly dangerous in the entire ancient martial world. If he was happy, he could completely do whatever he wanted. Lin Yi didn't have the hobby of learning from crabs. As long as he didn't go in too big of a circle, he would basically take the initiative to go around the spiritual beasts blocking the way. With a guy like him who had practically opened up the entire map leading the way, everyone naturally had a smooth journey. In the blink of an eye, it was noon of the next day. Just as Lin Yi was planning to find the shade of a tree to rest for a while, Bai Jingze, who was following behind them, suddenly started to howl loudly. He was still fine a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, he was covered in sweat. His entire body was extremely cold one moment, and extremely hot the next. It was as if he was having a pendulum. Moreover, he was rolling on the ground in pain, howling endlessly. Brother Jingze. Seeing this, Chu Tianlu became anxious. He was dissatisfied with Bai Jingze's actions last night, but they were friends for many years after all. He really couldn't bear to see Bai Jingze like this. However, he had no choice. He could only turn his head anxiously to look at Lin Yi. "Brother Lin, can you help me? How do you feel right now?" asked Lin Yi with a slight frown. If it was in the past, he wouldn't pay attention to this kind of vile scum at all. On the contrary, he would even make fun of him. However, as his level had increased, he had unconsciously become much more open-minded. There seems to be something moving in my stomach. A lot of things are moving. Ah ah ah. Bai Jingze howled intermittently in pain. Lin Yi walked over, and directly used his divine sense to forcefully sweep over his body. The result caused him to be greatly shocked. It really was as this guy had said. Unknowingly, a large pile of insects had actually hatched out of his body. They were all larvae of black insects. It didn't look like much on the surface, but this X-ray vision was really shocking. Even with Lin Yi's experience, he couldn't help but feel abnormally disgusted. Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little strange. When Bai Jingze was attacked by the black insects, although there were indeed black insects drilling into his body through the 7 orifices and pores of his skin, the tiny fire crystals produced by the 1,000 burst frenzy fists had also seeped in. In theory, all the black insects should have been wiped out. Although the fiery energy didn't have much of an effect on cultivators, killing the black insects shouldn't be a problem. Seeing Lin Yi frown, Chu Tianlu thought he wasn't willing to save him. He hurriedly pleaded, "Brother Lin, I know I'm going too far, but he's my friend. No matter what, please save him. There's not much I can give you in return other than the secret I told you before. If you like me, then let me serve you. I won't even bat an eyelid if I have to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a pot of boiling oil." Lin Yi glanced at him and said indifferently, "His body is now filled with larvae of black worms." Larvae of black worms? Chu Tianlu was shocked, but quickly reacted. It was injected by that illusory insect. Legend has it that after an illusory insect stings its prey, it won't directly poison them to death. Instead, it will ovulate in the prey's body. I didn't expect it to hatch so quickly. Lin Yi suddenly understood. He turned his head to look at the silent Zhang Qingfeng and said, "You also have them in your body, right?" "Me?" Zhang Qingfeng stared blankly. He was still gloating in his heart, but when he heard this, his complexion immediately changed. "I didn't steal the divine knowledge fruit last night, nor was I stung by an illusory insect. How could I have them?" "Is that so? But weren't you stung like him yesterday?" Lin Yi reminded him with a smile that wasn't a smile. This. Zhang Qingfeng remembered this, and immediately felt his body begin to churn. It wasn't completely a psychological effect, but there really were larvae of black worms crawling. His current symptoms were much lighter than Bai Jingze's, so he wouldn't be rolling on the ground in a sorry state. However, if he didn't receive treatment in time, he would sooner or later end up the same. "Save me. Brother Lin, save us. I'm begging you, save us." The two hurriedly asked for help from Lin Yi. At this moment, the only person who could save their lives was Lin Yi. From an emotional point of view, Lin Yi didn't really want to help them. These two people's characters weren't good, so there was nothing wrong with leaving them to fend for themselves. However, he couldn't resist Chu Tianlu's pleas from the side. In the end, he nodded and agreed. The process of saving them actually wasn't complicated. The larvae of the black worms in the two people's bodies were indeed a ghastly sight, making one's scalp go numb. However, due to their extreme fear of fire, they only needed to be exterminated by fire qi. However, this was only simple in theory. In reality, it was extremely difficult to carry out. It should be known that it was very difficult for the qi of different cultivators to coexist. Even if they were of the same type, it was still very dangerous for qi from an outsider to enter the body. If there was a conflict between their qi, a moment of carelessness would result in the meridians exploding, not to mention that they were not of the same type. In addition, even if they could suppress the conflict of qi, how to ensure that the larvae of the black worms wouldn't be harmed as much as possible at the same time was another huge problem. Therefore, this matter sounded simple, but even the most outstanding doctor would probably only frown and shake his head when he encountered this problem. Fortunately, they met Lin Yi. Although Lin Yi wasn't a doctor in the truest sense, he was an absolute expert in this aspect. Especially with his all-purpose qi, his control over qi, now that his primordial spirit had broken through to the middle stage of mysterious ascension, it was already gradually reaching the peak, so it wasn't a problem at all. Not long after, Lin Yi easily cleared the larvae of the black worms from the two people's bodies. Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng were both half paralyzed on the ground, looking like they were about to die from exhaustion. The two of them had already suffered serious injuries before, but because they coveted the spirit fruit wholeheartedly, they forcefully suppressed their injuries. Now, after Lin Yi's treatment, the after effects of exhaustion began to appear, and collapse was a very normal thing. Thank you, Brother Lin, for helping us. We can't thank you enough. Chu Tianlu hurriedly gave the two a meaningful look, and at the same time expressed his thanks. We can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough. Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng could only force themselves to crawl up, and embarrassedly express their gratitude, their faces carrying a bit of embarrassment and guilt. Chapter 54-37. Any normal person would be deeply grateful, and the two of them were no exception. It's nothing. It's nothing. Lin Yi waved his hand calmly. He didn't take their gratitude seriously, and didn't take it to heart. Lin Yi now had a rather unique view of people. The two of them, especially Bai Jingze, were too greedy and had a bad character. As for Zhang Qingfeng, after being completely tricked by the other party, he was still in cahoots with them. It was clear that he had a gloomy mind, and neither of them was a good person. Therefore, their cheap gratefulness was meaningless. Seeing Lin Yi's cold expression, the two of them exchanged a look with Chu Tianlu. Without saying anything more, they sat down to rest. Let's go. Lin Yi called out to Bing Wuqing and Chu Tianlu. Obviously, he didn't want Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng to follow them anymore. They didn't have much to do with each other in the first place. Moreover, with their bad character, not only would they not be of any help, they would only ruin things. What was the point of bringing them along? In the end, as soon as he finished speaking, Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng immediately struggled to stand up. Tai Snake Island was full of danger. If they stayed alone in their current state, the consequences could be imagined. In their opinion, since Lin Yi was willing to save them twice, it meant that he was most likely a good person. As long as they were thick-skinned and followed him closely, they probably wouldn't turn against him. Compared to their lives, what was a mere sense of shame? Bing Wuqing could not help but frown when she saw that. In her opinion, a heavily injured Chu Tianlu was already a burden enough. That was fine. After all, Chu Tianlu was actually a pretty good person. At least, he was not annoying to look at. However, Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng were different. Judging from their previous suicidal actions, if it had not been for Lin Yi's generosity, Bing Wuqing would have been turned into two human-shaped ice sculptures long ago. Yet, they still had the audacity to play petty tricks at a time like this. They had gone too far. When Chu Tianlu saw this, his heart immediately thumped. At this moment, he was very embarrassed and put in a difficult situation. After thinking for a bit, he hurriedly stood out to smooth things over. Brother Bays, Brother Qingfeng, the two of you are both heavily injured right now. Why don't you just find a hidden and safe place to properly recuperate? After 2 days, I'll come back here to rendezvous with the two of you. How about we go out together? This was the best solution he could think of. He couldn't just ignore his two friends, but he couldn't keep causing trouble for Lin Yi. This was the only way he could come up with. It was still a little dangerous for Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng, but it was much safer than running around with injuries all over their bodies. They just had to be more alert, that's all. What about you? Bai Jingze asked despite knowing the answer. Chu Tianlu scratched his head. Logically speaking, if he knew that he would only be a burden to others, with his temperament, he would definitely stay behind with Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng. The more they supported each other, the safer they would be. However, he made a promise to Lin Yi before. Before fulfilling his promise, he could only continue following Lin Yi. Brother Tianlu, could it be that you're going with them to do something big? Bai Jingze's question was rather incisive. If there wasn't anything important, he could conveniently ask Chu Tianlu to stay behind and drag him down with him. However, if there really was something important, he could continue to ask a few more questions. Perhaps he could find an opportunity. Zhang Qingfeng didn't say anything, but the same question could be seen from his face. He was waiting for Chu Tianlu's reply. When Lin Yi saw this scene, he shook his head. Chu Tianlu was truly the one who met the wrong people. He was clearly a man who valued loyalty above all else, yet the people he made friends with were all gloomy and scheming fellows. Who knew how many times he had suffered in the past, both openly and secretly? It can't really be considered a big deal. It's just that I made a promise to Brother Lin yesterday. I want to uncover a secret of Tai Snake Island that I previously discovered as a small repayment for saving my life, Chu Tianlu said truthfully. Tai Snake Island secret? What secret? The two hurriedly asked. When they heard this word, their eyes lit up. Any secret in this kind of place basically involved heavenly treasures. Since Chu Tianlu said it so seriously, it showed that this secret was absolutely not simple. Even if it couldn't compare to the most iconic spiritual knowledge fruit of Tai Snake Island, the level of the secret would not be too far off. This. Chu Tianlu wasn't really stupid. Since it was a secret, he wouldn't easily reveal it to others. Although with his loyal character, he wouldn't hide anything from his friends, the problem now was that he had already promised to Lin Yi. If he revealed it to Bai Jingze and Zhang Qingfeng, what would Lin Yi think? Tianlu, you don't have to feel embarrassed. We're just asking casually. Don't take it to heart. Zhang Qingfeng was very understanding when he saw this. Hypocrite. Bai Jingze cursed in his heart. Based on his understanding of Zhang Qingfeng, he was 100% sure that this guy was just putting on an act. His true thoughts were absolutely the same as his own. He wanted to dig out the secret of the Supreme Snake Island and take it for himself. Although he was cursing in his heart, on the surface, Bai Jingze also echoed, yes, yes. We've been good brothers and friends for so many years. How could we make things difficult for you, Tianlu, because of this? You really don't need to think too much about it. When the two said this, Chu Tianlu was immediately moved. He said, "Thank you for your understanding, but I only happened to read about this secret in an ancient book. It hasn't been verified yet, so I don't want to casually say it. If it's just a baseless rumor, wouldn't that be embarrassing? Since it's recorded in an ancient book, how can it be a rumor?" Bai Jingze didn't give up and beat around the bush. Because what it says is vague, and there are no other ancient records to support it, I haven't heard any rumors in this regard, so I don't think it's very credible. Chu Tianlu's expression was serious, as if he was recalling what he had read in an ancient book. If it was proven to be a rumor in the end, he really wouldn't have the face to face Lin Yi. What kind of rumor is it exactly? Zhang Qingfeng asked. According to the ancient book I read, since Tai Snake Island was formed from the ancient Tai snake, it has a snake head, a snake body, and a snake tail on the surface, so it must have a very important place, which is its snake abdomen. The true essence of Tai Snake Island is suppressed in the snake abdomen, which is the source of all spiritual knowledge fruits, the spiritual knowledge fruit's heart. When Chu Tianlu said this, he unconsciously became a little excited. This wasn't strange. If all this was true, normal people would be excited to hear it. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.